Call this study session on February 8th to order here. Let's see, we have all council except for Councilmember Driscoll present. Councilmember Grove is present virtually. Cool TV over in the corner there. Can you hear us, Pam? Pam, can you hear us?
Hear us.
He's trying to unmute, I think.
You can give us a thumbs up if you can hear us.
I think you guys
I think we're muted.
Are we muted? Oh, we are muted.
Which people have always asked if they had a mute button.
Oh, Pam, can you hear us? Oh, wait.
Oh, sorry. Give us a thumbs up.
Can you hear us, Pam?
Leave that one muted there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Uh-oh, hang on.
That's what happens when I mess with stuff.
It's deceiving because it's unmute.
It really did stay on mute.
It's okay, this is coming out of Doug's presentation time.
Yeah.
I'm down to an hour and a half now.
Let's see. Can you hear us, Pam?
Emergencies are we
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Well, let's
Okay.
get sorted out here. Good?
Try now with Pam.
Pam, can you hear us?
Nope.
We can see her. You can hear us now? Okay.
There you go, that's
Yeah.
what we're looking for. Yeah.
All right, well, welcome. So we've got three items on the agenda today. First is the emergency management update, and we have a financial service update about the Omnibus, and then we'll talk about council retreat prep. So item A, I'll turn it over to the manager to lead off the emergency management update here.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I think since the Marshall fire, I've had some conversations here with some of the council, and I think I circled back here with the mayor, and I think we agreed that I think our community could benefit a little bit from a conversation about our own approach to emergency management here, which you'll soon learn is pretty universal here. But I think it is an important time for us to step back. We've had a lot of work on this issue. In fact, Jackie Irwin, who's now with South Metro Fire, used to be with our own fire department and helped kind of manage emergency management here for us with the city of Littleton. So I think since then, of course, now South Metro Fire is off on their own here with our fire department. But I'm gonna actually turn it over to Doug Stevens, our police chief. He and I have been talking about this issue here ever since the fire department's departure, and kind of our need here to kind of resurrect this work that we do internally around this. And we'll explain kind of not just the presentation of this material, but the actual training, the identification of hazards and how we kind of manage and try to mitigate some of those. So with that, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, council. Especially me. Thanks. And I thought it was very brave of all of you to invite both Keith and I to talk on this very complex subject.
Get it out of
Limit
the
us
way.
to 30
Get it
minutes.
out of
And thanks, Jackie, for coming back and joining us. We miss you, of course. Jackie, as Mark said, is our former emergency manager here in Littleton. She actually wrote our emergency operations plan. That was updated in 2017. I think the last time it had been updated was 1817, so. Yeah, so it was written on like some animal hides or something, I don't know. I just wanna give you a quick rundown. Like Mark said, there's been a lot of questions. You've been receiving questions, I think all of you have from your community constituents about, what would we do if something like the tragedy of the Marshall Fire occurred in Littleton or in the surrounding area, and what are our plans and our capabilities? So I wrote, in the council communication, a kind of a very basic rundown of how we operate and how we work together as a team with surrounding jurisdictions and whatnot in Littleton to handle disasters. But basically, what it would look like if we had something like the Marshall Fire occur here, and our response and recovery would affect virtually every City of Littleton department. It's not a police department function entirely to do emergency management. We obviously are very responsible for the response piece, as is Public Works and Communications with Kelly Nardi and her team. But every department would be touched at some point, as you can see with the jurisdictions up in Superior and Louisville, dealing with what they have to do with recovery as well. And then there's a big preparation and mitigation piece that really the emergency managers are really good at, keeping awareness up to date, training, and those types of things. So every City of Littleton department has some sort of responsibility for emergency management. And both emergency response and eventual recovery would rely on partnerships with neighboring jurisdictions, both regional, state, and federal. So we start, as these incidents expand, let's say something like a fire, right? Of course, the initial response is going to be fairly limited. As the resources get there and see what's happening, they'll either deal with it themselves, or as it grows, as it did very quickly at the Marshall Fire, or as it may with a flood, or a weather incident like a tornado or something like that. As that approaches and gets bigger, then more resources will be brought in. In a city the size of Littleton, very quickly our ability to handle that internally would be overwhelmed, and we'd rely on our partnerships with neighboring jurisdictions. And as the incident grows, so too does our response and those reliance on outside jurisdictions. And as you can see with a major incident like the flooding and fires, very quickly it overwhelms even the regional resources, and then we get state and federal resources in eventually. We're able to do this and work cooperatively with these outside jurisdictions through our use of the National Incident Management System and the Incident Command System. These are fancy acronyms, and there's a whole book like about this thick on acronyms, as you've probably all seen with the federal government. But NIMS and ICS, they both provide us with a universal language to use for across jurisdictions, so that when a fire department is asking for one piece of apparatus or whatever we want to classify it as, another department from another jurisdiction that has been trained in the same method and manner would know what that means. They wouldn't send like a ladder truck for something they need a pumper on because they use a universal language. It's the same thing with the incident command system, where we would manage an incident using specific roles. They're really identified in 5 different roles: command, finance, logistics, operations, and planning. And through those 5 roles, all of the different departments in the city and those regional resources could integrate and work together using common language and then common responsibilities. And all City of Littleton personnel, key personnel, have been trained in NIMS and ICS on that nationwide system. And it came into play most recently with the COVID pandemic. When COVID first struck, what was it, like 8 years ago now, it seems like? So, and I gotta admit, I got a confession, I just told Keith this too. I feel a little naughty for not wearing a mask, like walking into the building. It's been so long that when you come in and you're not wearing one, you kind of feel a little weird. I feel free, but I feel a little weird, so I feel weird anyway. But anyway, in NIMS and ICS, we are all, several key personnel are trained in that, so we are able to operate together. What's different and where do we kind of feel the loss of an emergency manager? And Jackie did a ton of work when she was here on trying to get us up and to speed on, there's a lot of, it's the federal government, right, that kind of mandates these training criteria, and with that comes a few strings. So in maintaining that and getting all of our personnel up to speed on and maintaining those levels of readiness and awareness, maintaining and updating our emergency operations plan, our communications plans, all those things, really, it's a full-time, very complicated and complex task, and it does really require a dedicated emergency manager. Like I said, they're responsible for education of staff, community prevention, mitigation measures. Jackie spent a lot of time with us doing that in the past, and she does currently work in that same capacity in South Metro Fire. They update and maintain emergency plans. They train city personnel, establish and maintain resource lists, those universal resources for local, regional, state, and federal resources. What's available? Do we need an air tanker or those type of things? They're the folks who can help us make sure that we have that stuff available. We haven't had a City of Littleton emergency manager since Jackie abandoned us with Littleton Fire in 2019, January of 2019. So in the interim, all those roles have kind of been diversified throughout the department heads here in our individual departments. Like Keith plays a big role. Kelly and her team play a role. Tiffany pays for everything, which is helpful. And then, of course, the police department has a role. So when it comes down to some of those questions you guys are getting asked, some of the important ones, and like, how do we notify the community? One of the things we're hearing from the Marshall Fire is, there's been some complaints about, well, no one told us, we didn't know. And so what we would like to do is just promote a system called a RAP Alert. It's available through the county. Arapahoe County uses a RAP Alert. I think Jefferson and Douglas counties use Code Red, which is the same type of system. It's a proactive system, so residents, community members need to go online and register to be notified. And then when the county or or a jurisdiction asks the county to send out a notification, emergency notification. If you had signed up for Rapid Alert or Code Red, you would be receiving a notification on your cellular device or whatever that says whatever emergency you have signed up for. So if it's a natural disaster or something like that, you would be notified on your phone, and then you would know to look for additional information through more traditional means. The City of Littleton has a Rapid Alert on our website. You can go through the City of Littleton website, through the police department pages, it says emergency alerts. It has links for all 3 counties there on how to register for these things. But in addition, Kelly and her team utilize social media, traditional social media. So I can see I'm old now, right? So traditional was a landline telephone, right? So, but traditional social media, Twitter, Facebook, email notifications, it's a blast communication will be put out with the basic information on, hey, there's a, this situation is occurring, please go here for further information. So Rapid Alert is our first choice, social media, of course, register for those notifications. In the police department, when we have an incident, a more localized incident, say we have a shots fired call or we're on a barricade or something like that, we'll also use a reverse 911 type system where cellular telephones can be, and landline, if anybody still has a landline. I know some businesses do, and my grandparents, but still have landlines, but we can still reach out to those proactively in a certain geographic area and make those notifications.
With the reverse 911, is it only sent out in English, or are there other languages? I can think of certain.
I'm sure we have the capacity to do both. I don't honestly know. Can't answer your question. I'll find out and I'll let you know.
I remember that was one of the things that I saw coming out of the Marshall Fire is
Sure.
people that didn't speak English getting reverse 911s that couldn't understand what the message was.
And that's one of those important lessons we learn during an event, right? So yeah, that's a great question. I'll find out.
But at what point is it your responsibility to make sure you get the emergency response? Because I'm assuming Boulder had an emergency response system.
Yeah, I can't speak to it. I've seen some media reports about how it wasn't really active the way it was supposed to be, so I honestly don't.
So they have one, it just
Yeah.
wasn't, maybe it just wasn't operational?
Not sure. I'm not sure. So I know that I have personally registered for, so I live in Jefferson County, so I did Code Red, but I'm also on a Rapid Alert for here when I'm working, and I have not received some things, that I thought I probably should have. And I'm sure it's user error on my part, but I've also received a lot of different valuable.
Yeah, and I think
things.
I'm on a Rapid Alert, but I don't think I've ever received, have you ever received anything?
Yeah, so we've been pretty lucky.
I mean, Karen knows how to let me know my warranty's running out weekly.
Yeah, I get a lot of social security calls, yeah,
Yeah.
compromised, but, so that's kind of where we're at with that.
And who runs that? Who runs that Rapid Alert?
A Rapid Alert's it's a private entity, I believe, but it's basically managed through the county. So each county contracts with that type of service, and then as a member of the county, and we're in 3 counties obviously, so if you live in down in Trailmark, that's Jeffco, so you probably want to use Code Red. And then Douglas County is also on Code Red, but if I were a Littleton resident in any part of Littleton, I would do both. I would do sign up for all 3 counties notifications, and then if you work in Denver, figure out what their system is, because if you're at work, I would like to know that too. So it's really incumbent to a certain extent on your own responsibility to try to figure out where you are. And if you go to any of these local government websites, City of Littleton website has all 3 counties for us, but if you work in Denver, let's say you work up in Broomfield County or something like that, I would go to their websites and try to track that down.
And how do we know that's working? If I've never received the response or warning in a year, at least a year, maybe 2,
Yeah.
how do we know it's working? I mean, if it's supposed to be working in Boulder but didn't, how do we know we're telling people to sign up, but how do we know it's actually working?
Good question, go ahead.
They have done some testing, so typically when you look at your phone bill, there's a cutaway on your phone bill that goes into supporting.
Hey, what number would that be?
I don't know.
That line item.
I don't know how many you're calling it if it still comes in paper form, Jerry. So, but there's a fee that goes into that supports the 911 systems, and typically there's a regional authority which is overseeing a lot of that, and they do the best that my guess out of this post event is we're going to see more testing of those systems. Although there's mixed response on that. I mean, how many of you get Amber Alerts on your phone?
Mhm.
As an example. So, they work through similar systems. So I would suspect that we'll see some testing on that beforehand. The challenge is the opt-in situation. Before, when it wasn't an opt-in situation, you really struggled with the whole issue of there was a massive number of people that weren't getting anything on cell phones, because the cell phones weren't tied to the system. So, it's still a technology issue at some level. So we'll call the inside man when you're doing your security training, just double check yours, for sure.
What's the distinction between using a rap alert, which, opt-in, I can't imagine there's gonna be a high number of people that actually opt in. You ask people to do things, so that's hard to do, versus a reverse 911, which theoretically would go to every phone in a certain area. What's the?
And honestly, I'm not up to speed on the technology involved with even the reverse 911 given cellular networks. So I would imagine, based on common sense and some experience, I guess, some practical experiences, it's hit and miss even with the cells, because your service may not be one that we pick up somehow, or the technology may not touch that particular carrier somehow. So, it's hard to really give any single answer. I would layer it like any type of defense or preparation. I would layer it. So try to go with redundancy. So Rap Alert and Code Red, and be on Twitter feeds for your local jurisdictions so you get notifications. Probably Twitter, and Kelly's here, is probably the best way that most places are communicating. I know that's harder for some of our more seasoned individuals, right? I'm terrible at Twitter, but I do have notifications activated on my phone. And then individual places too. So I know Denver Seminary has an alert system. I'm on that alert system. So students at college campuses have campus alert systems, like ACC has one. We're on those too. So anything that happens at ACC and they send out an alert, I get notified on my phone. So that level of redundancy, I think, would be my best recommendation, because I don't think you should rely on any one system. So another question I know a bunch of you have been getting, at least has been forwarded to me more than once, has been what are the emergency evacuation routes for the city of Littleton? Whether that's a flood or a fire or whatever, or a dinosaur attack, who knows, right? And we don't have any designated emergency routes, because every emergency is different, right? And it can change rapidly. So even in the Marshall fire, if they had designated emergency routes, like you should take this way, and then that route is blocked by fire and impassable, a lot of people, that's the only way they know. They vapor lock, right? So then they're like totally lost. So it's my recommendation, again, when you have time, and I talk about this when we teach, active shooter preparedness and response, is when you go into your workplace or your home or whatever, go different ways. Different ways in and out of the building, different ways in and out of your neighborhood, different ways in and out of where you work. It's amazing for police officers and probably firefighters to a certain extent, although they always call us to block the traffic because they get to do all the fun stuff. But people roll up to you at a roadblock and they're like, I live in this neighborhood, and we're like, yeah, but this road's blocked. There's, a fire truck there and they're working and it's gonna be blocked for a while. Well, how am I supposed to get home? I'm like, don't you know another route into your neighborhood? And a lot of people don't, we're creatures of habit. So again, when you have the time, when it's not an emergency situation, our recommendation is you take a different route home. You take a different route in and out of your office. You take a different route in and out of your neighborhood or your church or the places that you frequent, just so that when it happens and you have to leave quickly and your brain is all fried and you're just like, you can't remember your own name, you'll have done it before, and research has shown you're better prepared to make a good decision and go, oh yeah, I know if I go this way, I can get out and get where I need to go. So that's our recommendation, and that's why we do not have any pre-designated evacuation routes. Another question you guys have been getting that's been passed on is, does the city manage shelter availability for evacuees? So is there a list of available shelters? Say if we had a fire, we have had a few situations here where large apartment buildings affecting the senior population have had fires where the building has become unoccupiable. Is that a word? Unoccupiable? It is now. Yes, we made it.
It works.
And so again, we rely on our regional partners there. On a large scale thing like a fire, like a wildland fire, like the Marshall fire, we would work with the Arapahoe County Office of Emergency Management or Jeffco Emergency Management, depending upon where it was, or Douglas County. And then we would help coordinate resources with that. They have lists of shelters that could be activated, again, through private partners like the Red Cross, through our churches, through schools. The types of things that you see on the media when they talk about sheltering for floods or fire, those types of, and again, they're fluid. We don't know what's going to be available when, what can be operationalized quicker, what can be available longer. what capacity each place has, and that's where we partner with the regional assets of the offices of emergency management. The city has no specific lists of shelters. We expand out when we need to do something like that. What can the community do to prepare? So again, we go to our online resources here. The Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So the state of Colorado has a terrific link on their website called Ready Colorado. So if you go to Ready Colorado on the state website, again, the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, or just Google Ready Colorado, it'll take you right there. There's extensive resources there on pretty much any hazard that you can think of. And it talks about things that the community can do to prepare for something like that ahead of time to put them in a better position should something like that occur, that they're better prepared to respond to it. There's terms out there that some people may have heard, like build a kit. You know, so like if you have to flee quickly or you have loose power for 3 or 4 or 5 days, you know, you're prepared, and it has recommendations for what you can do for things like that. South Metro Fire, you brought some folks with you here that have specific roles on community risk reduction specialists. Do you want to talk about what is available?
Yeah, so we have a really robust community outreach team. Ida and Selena are here. They're both in this jurisdiction, in this area, in Littleton's area. So they're going out to schools, communities, HOAs, doing that public education around how do you get prepared? What mitigation things can you do? And I'll let you guys talk. I know that they have a little bit more of an inside track on the reverse 911 and code red systems too, so they might be able to speak some to that.
Yeah.
But I'll let them take it over.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. It's an honor to be able to be in your schools and work side by side with your educators and even in this building as well. So thank you for having us here. We are deeply embedded in the community, and it's a privilege. It's an honor. It's meaningful connections. Building trust in small, meaningful moments over a long period of time is important. So it's wonderful work, and I think that both my colleague and I are really honored to get to do this work. Nobody cared about our job until January 1st, right? Nobody knew that we were a genre of expertise and that we existed until this year. So that has certainly sparked interest within our field in terms of how you do prepare, because it's incredibly terrifying. Our hearts go out to every Coloradan that was affected. Those are our neighbors, and all of us were touched or had a degree of connection with that tragedy. So it is really scary to hear that, but we feel more powerful when we're prepared, right?
So our job is to figure out what threatens our district, what threatens our responders, our firefighters, our police officers, public works, and then come up with programs to try to, if not eliminate that risk, certainly mitigate that risk, so that all of us can be safer at the end of the day. If you have specific questions, we're certainly happy to answer those. Like Chief Stevens and Jackie said, we both cover Littleton. Selena has the bulk of the city of Littleton, but my turf includes Trailmark, so you gotta peel that out of my cold hands. Your questions, a couple of the comments that did come up. Mr. Mayor, you were talking about reverse 911. That is a RAP alert. That's just the reverse 911 is like Band-Aid or rollerblade. It's actually a trademark. But when that call comes, when that information comes from the emergency responders, from the sheriff's office, regardless of what it's called, that's coming to not only landlines now, as you were saying, but also to cell phones and to other formats. My mom still lives up in Clear Creek County, so not only do I get the Douglas County alerts because I live in Lone Tree, and the Highlands Ranch in particular alerts because my daughters still live in Highlands Ranch. I also get Arapahoe and Littleton, or Jeffco, because that's where I work, and Clear Creek, because that's where my mom is. So I don't quite get as many alerts as you do, Chief, but take advantage of it. If you want to know, you can certainly know. It's just a matter of signing up. Does it work? Sometimes it works too well.
Yeah, that was the problem. As you're talking, I was thinking, when I signed up, because we had a push to do this a few years ago back, Chief. And as I recall, I was getting everything from somebody's cat's in a tree to, it was way overdone.
So the technology's always improving.
Okay.
In 2012, I was living at Quincy and C470, and I received the evacuation notice for the lower North Fork fire. Now, I could see the plume from where I lived, but I was not in the evacuation zone. I was 10 miles away. Since then, the technology's better. They're able to isolate different addresses better, more effectively. Next year, that technology is going to be even better than this year. It's not where you can just flip the switch. All that technology is still evolving.
And it's not a perfect system. I mean, it's gonna have flaws, right? And in Boulder County, they have two different systems. They have an iPod system and then a Code Red system, essentially. iPod works off a different technology than Code Red. So they were trying to figure out what's the best way to get a hold of all these people and which way are people gonna opt in? You know, if they put that their address is here, but their cell phone, they're down in Superior and they live in Northglenn, the cell phone tower that they're pinging off of is in Superior or Northglenn. So it's all dependent on, like you said, the technology around cell phones and how you're getting those messages and what tower you're close to. So they have to, it's constantly evolving.
That reminds me, when Columbine happened, Chief, I don't think you were here yet. But when that happened, that was the issue we had with trying to get a hold of whether it was Littleton, Jefferson County, Arapahoe County, is that people weren't on the same frequencies. Have those kind of issues been worked out at your levels?
Yeah, and that spurred a lot of the communication issues. Anytime we do an after-action report for an incident, big or small, communication is always the top concern for people.
Who
And
knew?
it's come a long way since Columbine, for
As
sure.
it will again after Marshall Fire.
Columbine, then 2 years later, 9/11, that's what really changed things. That's what was the spur for the National Incident Management System. ICS had already existed. It came out of California for dealing with wildfires. Post 9/11, NIMS came about, Marshall Fire, every big incident from there to now, it keeps evolving. So when all of us have great-great-grandkids, it'll probably still be evolving.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, and technology, the way that people interface with technology is changing all the time. I get an alert on my watch when I leave my dog at home telling me, hey, you forgot Taco the dog. You know, so these are things that are being incorporated.
Taco the dog.
The dog. So these are things that come
Wait a
into
minute,
play.
what do you mean when you leave your dog?
Yeah, I get a notice on my phone when I leave my dog or when I drop off my daughter at school. It says, Izzy, you left Izzy behind. And some days I live for that notice. Other days it's a little harder. So she's in middle school, you know how this is. But you know, so as we refine the technology, it's our job to help individuals learn what works for them. Because if you're getting too many alerts and you're gonna tune it out, that might not be the best option for you. So being able to empower you and help you get connected, and as you mentioned earlier, you know, at what point do we put it on people to be respond at every juncture? Individuals need to be given the opportunity to take the precautions that they need to be prepared and to feel prepared. I always use the kindergartner example because when we go into a school and kindergartners have a fire drill, guess what they do?
Line up.
Everybody has a job. If there's a substitute in the room, they're telling the substitute, here's where we need to go. So-and-so closes the door. This other person went, especially now with the mask, everything. They are like clockwork. Guess who is terrible at fire drills? All of us.
Oh, all of us. The high school.
You, Kelly.
Yeah. Lousy. They're the worst. Adults are the worst. You know, we forget our we want to go back and get our coffee. When I change our shoes, I forgot my phone. I need to do this. Let me just grab something off the printer. So the more that we practice, even the most practical applications, the more prepared we are. It's muscle memory. It's getting our brains into gear. Every single one of us, the day after that fire, thought, what would I take? Who would I call? How many chargers do I have? Do I have 2 days worth of medications? So this is the time to really push and use that momentum to get our citizens prepared and engaged, right? This is the start.
How often do you run drills in practice? Like, hey, we're gonna get on this day, we're gonna actually run through an entire simulation of, let's say, a plane crashes in, you know, South Park or whatever.
It's a Jackie question.
Yeah.
That's more of an operational sort of thing. In terms of the fire code, we can observe fire drills at commercial buildings. Really, it's their responsibility to do, but in terms of the operational sort of thing, that's a Jackie question.
Yeah, So those kind of large scenario drills, we usually do, with South Metro, we usually do 3 or 4 a year. The region does some that gets all of the regional agencies together and usually does them, and then the state does drills as well. Talking about like ICS courses or any of those kind of smaller courses that you could take, we offer those all the time. It's just a matter of making sure you guys have the information.
Do you work with the city and the police department when you do that? Say, hey, we're gonna do this, you're involved in this day?
I haven't recently, but yeah.
She's still angry over the breakup.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, and then a lot of those resources and classes are available online through FEMA for free and self-paced, which are really good. So you can take a lot of these basic certification classes at your own pace online, and they're equally as informative. And then it gets more complex all the way up to where you go out to visit Alabama, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's one in Alabama.
Where they have FEMA has a school that you can go to for, Kelly's been there for an extended amount of time, came back with an accent. Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, but when we talk about all these different things, you can even hear it at this table. We all have our own responsibilities. Fire has a responsibility, police has a responsibility, communications, finance, public works. You know, right now Public Works up in the fire area is dealing with debris removal probably more, and then getting infrastructure back in place. You know, how do you fix damaged roads and water systems and all that other stuff? So they're buried. The importance in it's vital that an emergency manager is there to help coordinate all this long-term and to prepare us ahead of time, because we're all in our own silos. And I'll be honest with you, these exercises are very infrequent, right? So South Metro can do their thing internally, we do our thing internally on a more frequent basis, but getting us all together is really difficult. And that's where regional resources help, and having these relationships with county emergency managements, and then the federal partners and state partners, because they have all the funding and availability to plan these larger scale exercises. We're lucky if we can participate in one of those once every 2 years. And we do, but they're fairly infrequent. They're very time consuming, very, very expensive and difficult to coordinate.
They
And
haven't
that's why-
happened in a few years because of COVID.
Right, I mean, like that's.
So we lived one in COVID. I mean, we were part of a large scale, multi-jurisdictional, multidisciplinary response and incident management team. So South Metro participated, the city of Littleton, everybody in this room participated in some way in the incident management over especially the initial onset. We didn't know what to expect, right? We set up our emergency operations center, just with the thought that we may have to go to a 12-hour on, 12-hour off shift. We may have to, if 3/4 of your staff goes out sick, how do we provide essential functions? So we planned for those things and we prepared for them, and luckily it never materialized for us. So, but we all became part of a multi-jurisdictional incident management team and worked together with other jurisdictions to get through that. And that's what we would do in a larger scale incident. An emergency manager provides us that opportunity to make sure we're ready to do that and keep us up to where we need to be. It's my recommendation that we explore, and I saw it's on the communication that I sent to you all, is that we explore the idea of maybe sharing emergency management responsibilities with another jurisdiction. Do we need one here 40 hours a week? I don't necessarily think so. I think
Not until you do.
Yeah.
I think when Jackie put all that effort into doing the emergency operations plan for the city, she was doing like 600 hours a week. But once you get that stuff done, the heavy lift's done, it's a matter of maintenance, right? So that would be a recommendation, is that we can reach out. We had some conversations with Inglewood in the past about sharing an emergency manager, and so I think that they'd be receptive to that again, or some other jurisdiction.
And I was thinking about that the other day, because Denver is Inglewood's fire department.
Right.
So would it behoove us to team or partner with somebody else, with a department that is not as large? I mean, like South Metro is large, of course. Yeah,
so you can also contract or try to contract with, say, Arapahoe County to do it. And Inglewood ran into this, and again, I'm not 1,000% up to speed on what they did, but we had conversations with them a few years ago about partnering and splitting costs for emergency manager. And then for some reason they decided to go on their own, and they ended up contracting with the county. They ended up paying for an FTE, 100,000 plus with benefits and salary, and then put that FTE at the county. So it was a city of Inglewood person being paid by Inglewood, but working at the county emergency operations center full-time, and then I see all kinds of problems with that. So, and it fell apart, so from what I understand. So they're probably back and they're looking for an emergency manager game, and it's a good time to approach them.
We have other options though, other than Inglewood though.
Yeah, capacity is an issue for like existing agencies. So we went to the county too and said, hey, what would be our options for emergency management? Like, we can't do it with existing staff, pay for someone and we'll do it. I'm like, well, if we're gonna pay for someone, we'll do it ourselves. So things like that. So I think it's a good opportunity to share, and you're right. Maybe with a similarly sized agency, I think we could split 50-50, and I think they'd be plenty useful for us. And I know I'm running out of time here, so another thing that I wanna talk to you about, because I have to pitch it, and this is my opportunity, but is what are the current, what can the city do to prepare? The emergency manager is one thing. The other thing is improve our current capabilities based on lessons learned. And that's from COVID and from the Marshall Fire. And the main lesson learned, I think, is flexibility, right? So in COVID, one of our concerns was not only, I remember at the beginning when it's everything you touched was going to infect you, right? We were scared to touch anything. We were coming in full hazmat suits and spraying everything down. And then as we learned over the 2 years, it's not necessarily as big a threat as we thought it was originally, but we didn't know that, right? So we set up the emergency operations center here, but then what happens if an infected person comes in there and now that room is no longer capable? In New York City, they had a brand new multi-billion-dollar emergency operations center on 9/11, and it was in one of the buildings that collapsed. It was the first time they ever used it. So they had to evacuate it immediately, and then they had to go to a backup center. We have backup centers kind of in the city, but really we rely on our mobile operations center, our mobile command center, which is 20 plus years old. And which is really cool though, because if you guys have like your VHS copies of The Lion King, bring them in. You can watch them on our VHS cassette player.
What's the point you're trying to make there, Chief?
Yeah, so I have an ask on, I think we talked about maybe using ARPA money on a one-time opportunity here to replace that piece of apparatus. And since the fire department's at the table, they'll understand that it's cheap by fire, right? So, but it's $1 million ask to replace emergency operations center, a mobile one. And that provides us that flexibility in the Marshall Fire. Obviously, the Louisville Police Department had to abandon their station. So if we have to do that, that's no dispatch. We have contingency plans in place with those partners of ours, but if we needed to, we need to move and be able to do those things out on the road. Or if we have something going on down at Trailmark and we need to be down there on site, or somewhere else in the city we have more localized, need to be there on site, that's a vital piece.
That PIO would be helpful as well.
Well, we have the PIOs done, so we're good there. But now's the next ask from the police department, right? I feel bad, but the questions, the things there and why I want to talk about this now is we do have ARPA opportunity here. And then also it's an 18-month or more build out on these things, because you can't get a Ford truck, much less a $1 million piece of highly technical mobile equipment, right? How many computer chips are going to be in that thing? So we've been in contact with vendors, and you're talking 18 months, so I want to get moving on it if we have the opportunity to do so. So, of course, that's something that's your guys' direction that we wanted to look at. I thought I'd bring it up again, so.
Councilmember Grove, did you have a question?
Yes, you answered it. How would we fund this emergency manager person? You said through ARPA. This seems like something, if we're going to commit to it, we want to commit beyond maybe ARPA funds, or just use it to start out. I don't know, maybe this is a Tiffany question or a city manager question.
Especially when it came to spending money, that's something we would look at in the regular budget. As part of the regular budget process for the emergency manager position, that's something we would look at long term. ARPA was for the one-time expense, at least at this point, a fleet replenishment fund, like Mark's been talking about, for ongoing, but one-time big ticket item like that, we would utilize ARPA probably for that. But for the emergency manager itself, we would look to incorporate that into the regular budget.
Associated with it would come from the regular budget. Would come maybe from ARPA, but the personnel costs would continue on.
From general fund.
And that would be a shared cost, right? We're looking to share
That
that
would be the
position.
Yeah, that'd be our goal, yes.
Okay,
But a new cost nonetheless.
yeah.
And I think you'd probably be looking, I think, Jackie makes insane money, but normally, I think it's in the neighborhood of about $100,000 that area with benefits and things, so split that if we could.
City manager?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just maybe a couple of comments here. I think, certainly with my own peers, there's been a lot of conversation around the Marshall Fire and what lessons learned and, how cities are gonna be responding. Our conversation's probably pretty similar to what a lot of cities in the state are talking about right now. I think we should have, some comfort and confidence in the staff that we've got here, certainly. We have some people here who've had a lot of experience in national disasters. Keith is an example of that. Yeah, we don't have enough time for Keith to get into it.
Disaster?
Yeah. But I think, and even myself, I know Kelly Nardi certainly has had a lot of experience about, national disasters and how you respond. Lots of conversations with Jackie when she was here, just about getting this organization kind of ready and to train. So I think one of the most important things that we need to look at, in my opinion, for the future, as we look to, managing emergencies, is not only just training people around NIMS and ICS and all those certifications, but actually doing tabletop exercises. Having come from the Seattle area where, that was a staple of the organization, twice a year with the county, every single employee had a color code to know which was their assignment and what period of time. So that's going to an extreme that I don't expect here, but it does demonstrate that you can go through a lot of work here to train and to be ready. And if you think about the disasters that we have here, we are blessed to some level. We're not gonna have, necessarily hurricanes, maybe not quite the threat of,
I hope not.
yeah, or tornadoes, but perhaps. But certainly wildland fire in the Trailmark area, we have exposure there. And I'm thrilled that we have a part of South Metro Fire who's working with our HOAs in our community to try to mitigate some of that problem. But clearly Trailmark has some exposure there. We also have a history, quite honestly, of train derailments. Those are disasters. And so when we have, certain kinds of cars that come off a rail, that can be a serious risk to this community. So all of this to say is that there's a lot more we can do to be prepared for this, and I do think that's a conversation for future budgets, and just making sure that, the council's kind of comfortable with kind of our level of effort.
In that regard, is the train, I was gonna bring that up, because are we aware, maybe South Metro knows or Chief, how often toxic materials go through Littleton?
I'd imagine it multiple
daily.
times a day, every day.
I actually have some
Are we
sense
aware
of
of
that. So the answer to your question is, the only people that get that information in semi-real time are the fire departments. And that's a post 9/11 terrorist reason. So, but on a research perspective, since we deal with the railroad, based on the most recent numbers prior to COVID, and I'm guessing it's higher now, we probably have at least 40,000 cars through Littleton a year carrying petroleum or petroleum derivatives. But we don't know that in real time. I mean, these folks have a better chance to get that than we do, but data-wise, we don't get that as a local community.
I would only add that outside of the rail cars, what's actually trucked through your community is also, should also be on that list. Whether it's Trailmark and Chatfield with the trucks that are going to and from Lockheed Martin. C-470, if the wind's blowing from the east, I-25, the wind's blowing from the north, I-70, Highway 85. I'm sure someone at South Metro Fire Rescue knows, but you don't wanna know.
Yeah, it's a.
You don't wanna know.
Yeah, we just did that number and we have a sense from the
Well, it's not that I know,
transportation
but
side.
somebody has to know.
It's a
We do have
delayed
that
number.
information. Yes.
But ultimately, if something flips over on a track or if a truck is involved in something, we're not gonna really know until we get there. And you see the placard on the side of it, and then you run that through your database and figure out, oh, we need to get the hell out of here. And we need to notify the community, and this is the size of the event, and then the smoke plume and the winds and all that comes into play, and that goes with what Mark was saying about tabletops, and that's a very common tabletop, as a hazmat situation, because it's very realistic.
Yeah.
Right, and it's complex, it can be complex, so preparing in advance, what's the communications plan gonna be? What's the area of evacuation gonna look like, who's gonna do that evacuation? Those types of things that you plan in advance, and that's our intent.
It's been a long time since we've had a train derail, but it happened over by St. Mary's.
Wow.
I know,
Jake's house,
Let's put everybody on alert.
No, I think that's, important to have these conversations to keep it, top of mind, cause you don't have an emergency for months or years, you kind of forget about it. And, it's real important to go do those, every situation's different, you don't know what it is until it happens, but if you're prepared to have that communication, when you don't have the practice of the communication, that's the big issue. And one more issue that probably for later, since we're kind of running out of time with this topic, but rather than the operations, the infrastructure, that, with the look at what we can do with, fire resistant buildings in the city and things like that, of what are the things that we can look at our code to change that might be best practices that, our codes haven't always been as up to date, and our plans have been up to date as until recently. Yeah.
City of Lone Tree is going through a similar process right now. Might be worth reaching out to them. They're working with a couple of our colleagues and trying to figure out how to adapt their city codes and regulations. It just might be a starting point.
There's a lot at the state level that's happening too, in terms of fire code. So I think a lot of the recommendation coming from at least South Metro Fire is to kind of watch and see what's happening at the state level before you guys, because we don't want one-off cities making, rule changes and code changes, and then the state comes down and says, hey, this is actually what we're gonna do, and then you guys have to go and change them all again.
And at the same time, we can't wait for the state.
Good point. Good point. It's being pushed, I think, because of Marshall Fire.
Yeah.
So.
Good.
I would just add one last thing to the emergency manager piece, and you guys kind of already touched on it a lot, but you can have all the plans in the world, but if you don't train on them, it's not gonna do you any good. So that plan, I wrote Chief Stevens into doing a citywide training with me for like a week and a half, and he was presenting for like 3.5 hours a day. He's like, who scheduled this? But we managed to get most of the city employees through that training, so it's possible to do, and I think that if you make it a priority to get people trained, then it can happen.
And that was how long ago?
Plan was written in 17, it needs to be updated already.
Yeah, which is the point I think you're making, and everybody else is making. Yeah, with that, I've been through training, and all my employees been through it. We don't do it often enough. The FEMA stuff.
And there's great specific training for city council, for, specifically to teach you guys what you're gonna do at this higher policy level, when all of, the response people are doing their thing, so there's a lot that you can learn and train on, and it's just being consistent about it and committing to it. I think that's what I ran into probably the most, was that we would schedule a training and then people's schedules kind of got, bombarded, and people couldn't make it to the training. It just wasn't a priority.
So wouldn't there be like a state report after sometime after the Marshall Fire that's gonna be, I'm sure it's gonna be shared with all jurisdictions? When do you expect that?
It won't be probably for a year.
Yeah, it'd be at least a year probably, because, there's a lot of research that has to go into that, and work goes into it, and then they look at a lot of the longer term things as well, like the recovery type deals, and and that recovery on something like that, like a flood or something, it's unbelievable how complicated and complex it can be for the different systems and infrastructure that's been damaged, and so a lot of that goes into the after action reports as well. You'll see the same things we see in every single one, initial communication challenges, really on that one, I'm anticipating, some confusion on, especially the way that fire spread, and I've been through those neighborhoods, as maybe some of you have, and it's just surreal because it's a total normal neighborhood, and then there's 2 houses burned down right in the middle of it. And you know what happened? The embers flew over and then landed and burnt. And then, like, if you're a firefighter, an engine company trying to respond to that, and then 2 houses over, something goes, it's just craziness. So, there's gonna be a lot of that and how you manage that up front. And
Are you defending the fire guys, Chief?
yeah, well, since they're in the room, yeah.
I think a big thing that will come out of that is how resources were ordered, and how they were deployed, because it was, you know, something that doesn't happen ever here, right? It's like the 500-year flood, we were talking about that earlier today, just, it's an anomaly.
It's like emergency management, it's hard to say.
Yeah. I can see that one though. Yeah, so it's gonna come out with a lot of resource issues at the state level, so hopefully we've been fighting that for a long time, but.
Does the county hold any sort of master service agreements with emergency management contractors to actually come and do the incident command and response stuff, or is that all in-house? Like some jurisdictions, especially multiple crowded cross-jurisdictional disasters, oftentimes they'll pool together for a contractor that will essentially run that, not necessarily in-house, because oftentimes the people affected by the disasters are also the ones that were trained to respond to them as well. So does the county have any sort of agreements in place, or are we part of that chain
So the
already?
3 counties all would manage it in-house, and they pull just like the city of Littleton would pull from Public Works and Communications, and they pull everybody into an incident management team to manage that. So you have the people that are supporting that, which is the emergency management office, and then you have the response side of it.
Right.
So when you hear emergency or incident management teams, those are usually the people that are responding, right?
Right.
And it could be multiple jurisdictions, different people coming in, and we all speak the same language because of all the things that have come through on that. But then within the county, you have the Emergency Operations Center, and they do training and stuff and bring people into that, depending on what the issue is. If it's a fire issue, they have that support from the fire department. If it's a public works issue, they'll bring in public works. So none that I know of, at least in the 3 counties in our district, have contractors that will come in and manage that. They'll manage it themselves.
Entities also respond to those incident command posts.
Right.
So for the Marshall Fire, they also had representatives from Excel, for example, as part of that unified command structure. So it wasn't just Boulder County, it wasn't just City of Louisville. It was everybody in the county working together, it was other folks from neighboring counties. There was a request for public information on it, a request for planning chiefs, people came from all over. It's just like when South Metro handles a big incident, we still have all the other incidents to handle as well.
Right.
Louisville couldn't totally shut down. Boulder County definitely couldn't shut down. So
Does that answer
team
your
effort.
question?
Yeah, no, I guess kind of what I was getting at is that some of these services are oftentimes contracted out.
Yes.
And especially when it concerns, like, for example, updating emergency management plans.
Yes.
And then also doing that ongoing training. It doesn't replace an on-staff person far and away, but it obviously supplements and takes on the burden of the grunt work of getting everyone up to speed. But a contractor oftentimes will also like do retraining on the incident command system stuff, new updates on communication policy or recovery policy. So I wasn't sure if the counties had a contractor that would do that for them, or if we would pull with other municipalities to do that.
Councilmember, actually my experience in Seattle, the city I was in, we hired somebody, this was after 9/11, and so they had a grant where we hired an individual who then we contracted out to various cities who did this training and developed their own manuals and performed all their training exercises and stuff. So I think it's possible. And I think that's perhaps what the chief and I have been talking about is at least some kind of a partnership between us and Inglewood to look to try to mitigate some of that cost and experience. So, yeah, I've seen something similar to what you're describing.
There is a lot of emergency management contractors out there.
Yes.
And it's
I know
just
for like-
sourcing it with your, finance and all of that stuff, but
with-
that's all they do, plans and training.
Yeah, and Florida has them on call for every debris removal and every hurricane that passes through, because it happens on a semi-regular basis now. But I know that is not the way we are operating, but I wasn't sure if we had given thought to if we pooled resources together for a contracting service to take it on periodically.
It's possible.
Okay.
Yes, it's definitely out there.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
actually big business in emergency
it's
management.
huge.
Well, I know everyone's surprised that a presentation led by Chief Stevens took about twice the allotted time.
I'm gonna blame it on questions.
But does anyone have any other pressing questions they need to get now, or can we move on to the next item?
Great,
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming in. Thanks, Chief.
All right. Next item is financial and service update for the Omnibus transportation system. And Ashley is going to lead us in that.
Thanks a lot, man.
Mr. Mayor, can I just do a
Yeah.
quick introduction here as staff has a seat here. So we're having this presentation here because the council, when they approved the budget here last fall for 2022, they asked specifically to come back and report out on some service options and on the Omnibus and bring back a little data on usage and the like. Going back even further, as we were wrestling with the impacts of COVID, especially in the early 2020, one of the first things we had to look at is this service, because in essence, people couldn't use it because of the pandemic. And so what are we gonna do about trying to mitigate some of the costs? So it was at that point in time when we started looking at different alternatives. So that, again, that brings us back to today. We have a contract with VIA to perform the service. And so we're gonna report out on that particular activity. The last thing I just would say is that, I think staff has done an amazing job collecting data, by the way. We were never able to do that before.
That was a lot of info.
Yeah. So I think, we talk about an organization that's really kind of driven on data, and I think this is a great example of what we're capable of doing. But even that had its challenges because the systems that we have are pretty archaic. So kudos to staff to try to get all this together, even with the systems that we've got, which kind of a handicap at times, to be honest. So with that, Ashley, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Council. I'm Ashley Bolton, the Administrative Services Director, and I have with me tonight Genevieve Van Bueller, who is our Senior IT Business Analyst. Before we jump into the presentation, just wanted to also give a reminder on the Omnibus program in general, and that it does fall into quartile 2 of PBB, which is more aligned due to its connection to community and connecting community with its ability to offer rides. But did also want to point out that it is not a service that's mandated. It's a service that only, as you saw from the data, supports currently right now about 100 citizens right now who are taking advantage of it out of our population of about 50,000. And it also proved to be a candidate, well, also there are very many options that we'll be talking about you tonight, but it also proved to be a strong candidate for outsourcing, which is exactly why we met with many of you back in December of 2020 to talk about the outsourcing partnership with VIA. And before we jump into this too, and given the Marshall Fire conversation before, did just want to take a second to talk about a meeting that Jen and I had along with our Deputy HR Director, Jacqueline Stewart. We meet with VIA once a month, talk about the program, talk about our data, talk about how we can improve things, talk about the pandemic, and also just what VIA is seeing throughout the metro area in terms of transportation. But they shared with us, they're based out of Boulder, Colorado. They were founded there back in 1979. But they were on the front lines helping during the Marshall Fire, telling us harrowing stories of, they were helping with the evacuation from the hospital at the Louisville, fires on both sides of the street. It was their VIA drivers and vehicles that were helping the community members. They still to this day are helping with folks who lost everything, don't have rides, need to get back to the properties. So just wanted to share that with you in the sense that this is the type of partner that we're working with here, and God forbid something ever happened to Littleton, knowing that we could count on them to be a partner to help us as well. So with that, we wanted to jump into a little bit of the data. Hopefully you got a chance to read the council communication. There was a lot of data in there, and part of what we wanted to do was to show you how hard it can be to actually see data just in a Word format or a spreadsheet. And so wanted to also see if we could do a live demo with you to show you where we're trying to move in terms of using tools like dashboards and analytics, what we call BI, business intelligence, to show you how much, easier a visual interpretation of the data can be. And we don't have, as Mark said, all of the technology in place, but Omnibus is one that we've really started with and using a tool called Microsoft Power BI. So we're really excited to show you just a quick demo of that and some of the possibilities of where we're really trying to take the city. Because when you have data and what gets measured gets improved, and so that's really our focus here, and thought we'd take this opportunity to show you. But real quick, before the pandemic actually hit, we had started collecting data, and we had about, I guess, 2.5 months before the pandemic hit, March of 2020, where we were manually collecting data, and really before our VIA program had started. We ended up shutting the Omnibus program down, as well as the shopping cart, for a significant period of time. But we were able to get about 3 months. This isn't apples to apples by any means, given we had 3 buses actually running them. Right now, we currently have 1. I think a big difference between the pandemic that we tried to point out, we used to do a lot of group shuttles, and so when we'd bring 10 people over to the Buck Center for Silver Sneakers or to a luncheon, those actually counted as trips. And during the pandemic, it was really 1 or 2 riders per trip, and so we end up really not being able to kind of equate the two, but nevertheless wanted to show some kind of comparisons just so you had some data there. These are just some highlights, and Jen's actually gonna jump in and do a live demo here. But just did want to point out, since inception, which was mid-February of 2021 when we started the VIA partnership, through the end of December, we have had 102 unique riders. There are riders who take multiple trips, but 102 unique citizens throughout the community. They completed 1,676 one-way trips, so a round trip would actually count as 2 trips in this number. And just wanted to highlight that given we were trying to focus on medical trips, we did have 384, which actually only ended up being our 3rd most popular category. And I think that's a big reason what we wanted to share with you tonight was there really still is a need for the Omnibus, because a majority of these citizens were going out for recreation, going to the Buck Center, going to meet friends at a restaurant, going to get their hair done, going to the grocery store. And so there is a need outside of medical trips for these community members. The average cost ended up being, with the $80 an hour rate that VIA charges us, ended up being an average of $67.49. I think when we had talked with you guys earlier in the year, we were really looking at more up in the 80s per trip. And so as we have increased ridership and have been able to see some of the pandemic restrictions ease a bit, we are seeing that average go down, which is a really good thing. And Jen will show a little bit more about some of the trends when she does the demo here. Also did want to remind you that we only we only pay for hours that we use. So for example, if there's a snow day, we're not incurring any costs. So that is another advantage of the outsourcing model, where we only pay for what we use. Whereas if we had employees on staff, et cetera, that would have been a sunk cost we would have to absorb. This was just a quick snapshot, and I think Jen's even going to show this here, but just showing again some of those trip purposes and seeing that, again, the recreation and shopping, grocery shopping, are really 2 of the big needs that we've seen, at least this past year, with medical bringing up the 3rd, and then a variety of other trip purposes. Any questions on this before we jump into the live demo? All right, Jen's gonna cut over to Power BI, which again stands for Power, basically Business Intelligence. We have a few dashboards in here, but wanted to focus in the interest of time on just 3 of them and show you some of the things that we can do with data, as well as we start to get more and more data. The really cool thing about it is we can start to see trends and start to compare month over month. And now that we're almost into the start of our 2nd year, we'll start to be able to see things year over year, and it'll be really fun to see probably a year from now to look back and say, oh my gosh, and obviously we've got COVID as an explanation, but really being able to do those comparisons and have staff being able to focus on what really is going on, why is it going on, and helping us to make better decisions based on the actual data versus having to pour through spreadsheets or the Word document, for example, that you guys were subjected to as part of this. So with that, I'll turn this over to Jen, and she can talk a little bit about what you're seeing here.
Thank you, Ashley. So yes, as Ashley mentioned, this gives some graphical visualizations for you guys to kind of see some of that was just written in the information you received last week. You're able to look to see what shift times are the highest popularity versus what days. You're able to see kind of in your bottom left there, the different categories went side by side and see where they are in relation to each other. Looking down at what age ranges and how many trips are those age ranges taking. Seeing definitely we're hitting a great number in the 80s. late seventies, early eighties. We're seeing a lot of trips there. So this kind of gives us a great deal of ability to see very quickly what days, if we needed to limit the availability of the omnibus, what days and time slots would be the best and most utilized. And looking to see, are there age groups that we maybe need to target a little bit more, or seeing where the omnibus is actually fitting in.
So for example, if we did wanna look at making changes, right now we do operate from 8 to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday. VIA apparently also did take some 7 a.m. trips to basically cater to some of our citizen needs. But for example, knowing that the least amount of trips are at 2 and on Thursdays, we potentially could look to run Monday, Wednesday, Friday and try to see if we ultimately could get 2 buses going, or those are the kinds of decisions that we're really trying to look at over time. Assuming if we did wanna continue this program and continue to cater it towards what the demand of our citizens actually is.
So looking at one of our other slides on the dashboard, this top one shows again kind of looking at the days and what categories are the highest numbers. Again, you see that recreation and grocery is the top 2, with medical coming in shortly close. Wednesdays and Tuesdays, again, what Ashley just mentioned, right? Those are the highest volume days. Your trends, this bottom graph, looking at trips month by month and looking again at recreation. But what this one also shows is with each month since we started Omnibus through VIA, our number of trips have increased every single month. So with the pandemic, even starting in February, you're seeing, obviously that bottom line, every month we are increasing our number of trips. And so it'll be really interesting, as Ashley mentioned, as we go into the next year. This is gonna be our year-over-year dashboard. Right now, it looks pretty like a mountain foothill. As we start getting into February and putting in February and March areas, you're gonna start to see another color come in and showing your variances between 2021 to 2022. And so again, with COVID being an asterisk there, the footnote, seeing what kind of trends that we are looking at.
This year.
So those were the 3 dashboards. Did you want to comment on any of those?
No, so that was just to give you guys essentially a flavor, again, of what's possible and how we're really trying to focus on that analysis piece, that comparison piece, drawing our eyes to the data that we may want to question or drill into versus having to pour through the data, figure out how to aggregate it and what does it really mean. Basically given the opportunity to allow decision-making quickly, actionably, based on a visual. So I think, any questions on the existing, service with VIA over the last 11 and a half months?
Do you have data on where the trips are going from where to where?
We do. As of right now, our city limits as part of the VIA contractor within the city limit, actually 13 square miles. We do have 3 exceptions with, I think one's Tri-County Health, another is the Kaiser facility, I think, out on Arapahoe, and there's a 3rd medical facility. So we try to restrict that, but we do actually have, Genevieve has partnered with our GIS group to actually take the origins and destinations and actually plot those actually on a map too. So we have that data as well. And I think I knew one of the questions, I believe it was Councilmember Driscoll had asked about some of the actual, senior living homes, for example, and we tried to include that as part of the council of communication. So you also saw some of those facilities where I guess they were very, very popular in terms of requesting omnibus rides.
Well, in the communication as well, there was one map. We have really kind of 2, but we did provide one with some colored bubbles to look to show the number. So that's not as drilled down as probably you're asking about, but we do have actual as a bird flies trip to trip.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the origin map.
That was the origin map. It was in the
Yeah, I saw that
communication.
origin map, which was good. I only asked because in the future, and this is excellent, by the way, thanks for collecting all this data, we can also look at other options to supplement these transportation options where we are seeing more frequent,
Exactly.
routes and everything like that as well.
And we'll get into, well, actually right now we were gonna segue into some of the other options that we actually did pursue to bring.
Councilmember Grove has a question before you move on. Councilmember Grove?
Oh, sorry.
Hi Ashley, you provided a lot of data, but before we get to the alternatives, how is it going with this subcontractor in terms of the softer kinds of things? Are they responsive? How's their customer service? Do you feel like it's a good partnership?
I feel like is a fantastic partnership, Councilmember Grove. VIA does personalized training actually on the paratransit needs, and the feedback we've been getting on Mark, we've got a dedicated driver, so it's similar, I think, back when we had actually employees who were our drivers, that the community members are getting to know Mark because he's a consistent face, because he's the same driver that they do see every day. In terms of complaints, we haven't had any complaints. I think we did have the one situation last summer where it turned out to be a confusion because that one community member had never even ridden but was frustrated. I think because the service hadn't started, and I think she needed a return trip that was after 2. But since then, we haven't gotten any negative complaints. So I did actually get a call from one of our blind community members. We had taken the time to actually try to set up routine rides. He has a standing date every Tuesday, I think at 11 a.m. And so had proactively worked with VIA to get that scheduled and on the calendar. So he didn't have to call every week, that it was already booked. And he called to personally thank me and just say, this is so wonderful. Like it felt like the old Omnibus service that we had before. And then I think even too, just hearing about that Marshall Fire support that they extended, I think, to the communities up north, knowing again that we're working with a partner who really does provide that kind of support to the community. I think we're very pleased.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add, Pam, that I have lots of clients that use VIA, and it's like a game changer for them. They use it primarily for therapy appointments, but it's really solved a lot when we were meeting in person. So very good experience that I've heard anecdotally.
And are those clients that would live in Littleton or, so, because they're doing outside of Littleton service as well.
So, and we'll talk about that because it's a little bit confusing, but VIA also took over the Senior Resource Center transportation services, I believe back in 2019 for the county. So they also service our Littleton citizens, and there's an overlap. And so we tried to share some data because it does get a little bit confusing because they have 2 options of really using VIA here in Littleton. I think the benefit, again, Omnibus is it's only for citizens of Littleton. With the VIA paratransit service, anyone in the metro area can use it. So they're in essence competing for rides. Whereas Omnibus, they're not competing for rides. It is just for our citizens.
And that's great that your patients have discovered it. Because I don't think that's something they've known all along, is it? When we had the Omnibus, were they using that?
Our social workers would just link them up with whatever was available, and it just would depend.
So it's great that people are finding out more about it.
Well, in Medicaid, and this might be what you're getting to, Medicaid covers that cost and also contracted with them, and that was my question for you. I'm not sure, is that contract through the county or is that a state contract with
Are you talking about the VIA paratransit? I believe it's actually through the county. I think it's for Arapahoe, I think Denver, I think it's Adams and Jeffco.
And that's new too. That used to not be the case either. So VIA has like kind of come in and almost like cornered this market. And I think that speaks a little bit to the customer service piece, that people are like, yeah, this is a good service.
I would think some of your folks have to go out to Arapahoe County.
Yes.
Somewhere, I mean, out east of
And
here.
the previous service before the county took it over was horrible. It wasn't reliable.
And
It was,
Omnibus didn't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a reminder too that VIA is a nonprofit, so just wanted to get that out there.
So is Omnibus.
Indeed it is.
Yes, we are.
Any other questions on the existing Omnibus service?
I have a question just about the vehicles. I wasn't quite clear on that, how that would be incorporated into the costs.
So the existing vehicles we had bought during a grant, I believe, back in 2017, so Littleton outright bought those. We would have the option to do that again, but from my understanding, it's a time-consuming process. There is a lot of paperwork. I think the chief was alluding to the shortage with vehicles and even the procurement process. So that is something that we could look to partner with them. We would have the option of, we could absorb the cost of buying them outright. I think it ended up being, it was like $45,000 was net what we had to pay back in 2017. Who knows what that would be this time around? So we would have to either come up with that money and pay for it kind of as a one-time ad hoc fee, or VIA would be willing to actually, assuming we would engage, I think, in a longer term contract, outright buy them and then spread the cost of that in the hourly rate over however many years. So one option, whether they thought it would be minimal, maybe our cost would go from $80 an hour to $90 an hour, but we obviously won't know until we actually get the details.
So do we like rent them then, our buses? Like how does that
So
work? I'm not
They're
clear.
still our buses.
Okay.
So
They're
they
only
basically.
operating in Littleton.
Correct.
Okay.
They're parked here at the city center. Mark drives down from Boulder. And so that actually, by having them parked here, saved a lot of time that we didn't have to pay for him driving them back and forth. So we keep them here on site. But they, right now we've got 2. So they actually maintenance them down at their Franklin's facility down in Denver. So if one of the buses has to go in for service, they'll have somebody come out and get it. And so right now things are working with the 2. But knowing these buses typically have a lifespan of 5 to 7 years, we're hoping ours are gonna be more on the 7-year, given they really haven't had a lot of mileage put on them, given the pandemic. But at some point, they would need to be replaced if we wanna continue this program.
Did it include grocery store stops? I can't remember your stats.
So it does, so a grocery store was actually the number 2,
Right.
yes, purpose. One of the things we did mention is VIA does also offer a grocery delivery. So they basically just need to communicate with the resident or the community member, get their credit card or whatever payment information, and they're willing to actually do a grocery store run and bring those groceries back. I don't think our community knows about that, and so that was one of those, bless you, one of those options that we thought we could also try to get out there, and if it ends up growing, look at other options. Right now, they would use our existing Omnibus service, so would almost set it up as a, book it as an appointment to go do that run. But that also would help our community members not have to leave if they didn't want to.
And we do shopping centers and other retail areas within a city.
We take
Yeah.
anywhere,
Where they wanna
we had tried to say we're prioritizing medical when we restarted, but we take them anywhere they wanna go as long
Because
as
we
it's
used to
the
segregate
boundary.
it between omnibus and shopping
shopping
cart,
cart.
so
Well,
now
that's
we're
the-
just
that
under
was the
one.
shopping cart, was it?
Right,
was
yeah.
a
That was
Specific
the
And
route.
now we're doing it
That
under
was a
one.
fixed route, and this is now basically on demand. You call and tell them where you wanna go.
Basically, Uber or Lyft,
Yes,
I mean, that's what it is.
yes.
Yeah. Any other questions on this part?
Okay, so we're gonna jump in next to several of the options that we know are available to our community members, and we tried to pick out a few different categories here that Jen will talk through for comparison purposes. So maybe we'll go through the 6 and then can open up for questions if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Great, so I believe that a member of Lump Inc. has come to council previously talking about their services. They are located here in Littleton. They provide free trips for medical, dental, and legal appointments only. They are relying on volunteers using their own personal vehicles. So although they say they're wheelchair accessible, they are not fully ADA compliant, because when they say wheelchair, they're expecting the rider to be able to move from their wheelchair to the vehicle and store the wheelchair in the trunk. So it's not a completely ADA.
They don't have a lift
They
like our
don't.
omnibuses have.
Because they do completely rely on volunteers using their own vehicles. With Love Inc., they don't do any groceries, they don't do any recreation as omnibuses. They don't do any monthly billing because it is a free service that they provide. Obviously, there would be no requirements of significant City of Littleton resources being used. We also reached out to 2 national companies, GoGo Grandparent and Hop Skip Drive. Hop Skip Drive, I'm gonna kind of skip GoGo Grandparent for a minute and go over to the far right. So they are somewhat national. They participate in multiple states, including Colorado. They are currently partnered with Littleton Public Schools. They are actually not age specific. They actually kind of target more school-age children. However, they did just start taking over Dr. Cog's within the last year and a half. So they are starting to cater more towards those senior community members. They do trips for medical appointments, groceries, recreation, anything. Again, very similar to Love Inc. They're like Uber and Lyft, and so relying on people's personal vehicles, they cannot provide any ADA guarantees from a transportation perspective. There is a monthly billing. Now, Hop Skip Drive would require a significant amount of City of Littleton resources. They would require somebody to actually be that call center for the rides within the city, where VIA actually does that for us. So looking at the cost of Hop Skip Drive, they have a $2.99 charge per mile plus a $19 base fee. So your prices are definitely gonna be definitely fluctuate a little bit more, yes, thank you, variable, and not be more static as we are with VIA at a per hour rate.
Now, the way we used to do Omnibus, it was the front desk person used to do the scheduling, so it wasn't like we had a designated person then. So this wouldn't have to be designated as
I believe she spent probably 50% of her
A good
time
part of
actually
her time.
doing, yes. And she was also the data analyst trying to collect data, and I think it was a significantly more part of her job than the front desk than we knew.
With GoGo Grandparent, we're gonna start kind of on the ADA vehicles, right? They have limited, they actually use Uber and Lyft. There are more and more Uber and Lyft drivers that are starting to come in with Lyft and actual ADA compliant vehicles. GoGo Grandparent tries to match up the rider's profile with available riders. If somebody is needing that ADA compliant vehicle, the risk is definitely a longer wait time and looking to say, hey, book it more ahead of time. There would not be any City of Littleton resources. However, again, their cost is more variable because in addition to paying Uber and Lyft cost, there is if we set up a subsidy with the City of Littleton, they would charge us a $5 concierge fee per trip. If you're a citizen just doing GoGo Grandparent on your own, you get charged 27 cents per minute on top of that Uber and Lyft charge. We all kind of know Uber and Lyft, depending on the time of day, what's going on around you, those rates can spike. So again, very much variable.
GoGo Grandparent was one that seems like they're very tech savvy.
Yes.
And similar to, I think, what South Metro was talking about as well, that the tech is getting better and better. This may be one we keep our eye on for the future, because they did suggest that at some point they could try to do some kind of boundary with Littleton where they could use their technology to make sure, hey, we're only taking you within the City of Littleton boundaries. If you cross over and you want to go somewhere else, well, then the rest of that trip is on you so that we're only supplementing basically within the boundaries. So I don't think the technology is there yet, but it's something that they're working toward. They also do have a pilot program where we could start off for, I think there still was a cost to it, but with 10 riders, for example, and see how it goes, see if they're comfortable with it. Also knowing these are sometimes our most fragile community members, hopping in a stranger's car versus a known bus that they know, I think there also may be that comfort factor. But that's where we can also start to continue to look at our age demographics and see, well, are we starting to get more younger riders who may be more familiar with this model? So again, I think something for us to keep our eyes on, but not feeling again like this is something that's ready for prime time that could take the place of Omnibus at this point in time.
I have a question, and maybe you can help me answer this. So my sister-in-law lives in California, and she had to take, it's like an Uber medical service. She had to have a procedure, and because she was under sedation, this particular business brought her home. Is that something that's out there too right now that is covered under Medicaid or Medicare? Would it provide specific Uber medical trips?
There are companies out there, I believe one is actually called Mile High. I actually, from a personal perspective, just had to deal with this in the last week or so, where we needed to get a ride from the hospital to home, but the doctors would not release unless it was a ride that allowed him to be in a stretcher.
Yeah.
Right, which is more than just your ADA compliant vehicle. which is funny because while I was doing all this research, I actually had to use it from a personal basis. And so we actually had to go outside and look for and pay out of pocket a very steep price to find that Medicare did not cover for a structured transport.
And I know, in my case, when I did my knee just recently, Kelly, that they wouldn't release me to Uber or something like that. But there's gotta be some that have to.
Right, I'm not
use it.
necessarily saying like, you know, for procedures or whatever, but just for regular medical office visits or,
I think it depends on the kind of disability too that the individual has and what kind of services and support they have for that and what the eligibility is. That's a good question, I don't know.
Yeah, and we didn't specifically reach out to Uber or Lyft. We were catering more, I think, to, we worked with Dr. Mack to really look at the transportation companies that were specifically targeting Littleton, knowing that Uber and Lyft really is everywhere. But we're happy to see if we can do some additional research for you on that. Again, this is, poor Jen's been doing it on her own for her own needs anyway.
Kelly, Mile High is an ambulance, it's a private ambulance service, so they do have a contract with Medicaid. I'm sorry you had to pay so much, that's rough.
it is rough.
Medicaid has a lot of so many hidden contracts, and it's just like, you can't even track them all. And each hospital, you know, has their own sort of system and own preferred place that the contract is with and how they do their contracting. And some will eat the cost because they get a bigger reimbursement from Medicaid on the other side so that they will contract privately. And so it's part of the nuance of our healthcare system.
Right. One of the other things that Go Grandparent talked about possibly doing in the future was they could also look to put a cap on how much a particular citizen could actually, I guess, spend per month. One of the data points you might have noticed was, I think we still had our top 10 frequent riders who really ended up taking over 60% of the trips. And so in terms of trying to also even things out, they could potentially look to say, hey, you know, each citizen would get a cap of, let's just say hypothetically, I don't know, $200. And as soon as they hit that, basically the service would be cut off for that month. So that's another way too of looking at actually trying to, I guess, manage the program. But again, I'm not sure the technology is in place to truly do that. And obviously I think there need to be a lot of communication in place with our community about changes like that and how they'd be able to supplement for those ones who really do rely on it for a lot more than a few trips per month. So we'll jump down next. I think we've got VIA's county services was the next one we wanted to talk about.
Yep, and so as you guys have kind of already talked about, the VIA county service that is not just Littleton, right? They do the medical appointments, the grocery, the recreation. They do have the ADA compliant vehicles. They do a monthly billing, very similar to what VIA is doing with Omnibus right now. It does not require any significant City of Littleton employee resources with no service charge. As of right now, that VIA county service is free because it is subsidized by the county.
And VIA did share with us that the county, I believe, does it on a per ride. We do it on a per hour, and I believe the cost is $60 per ride, which also makes us feel better, I think, about the $67 that we're coming closer to what others are paying.
Here we have really a summary. The next two slides are a little bit more detailed to kind of give you some graphical information that I think is very, very helpful by looking at the two RTD resources that there are. There's the RTD Flex Ride and the RTD Accessa Ride. The RTD Accessa Ride, the one thing with that is that riders have to go through very similar to what they need for a handicap sticker for their car. They need a doctor's approval, they need to go through an intake form, different things like that. So there is definitely a higher requirement for those Accessa Ride riders. Flex Ride, it is a little bit more, and we'll go down into the Flex Ride. So it is $1.50 per ride if the rider has a valid Accessa Ride ID card. That it does include a 3-hour free transfer. So if somebody wants to take it to the Buck Rec Center, do an hour Silver Sneakers, and then go back, it's really just that $1.50 round trip. The thing with RTD Flex Ride, there's two things I wanna call out here. One is it requires the riders to be able to walk or get to the bus if the bus is not able to get into the driveway or roundabout. It does not guarantee a door-to-door, which Via Mobility does right now. The other thing is, if looking at this graph, you'll see very little blue in the city of Littleton boundaries. RTD has certain service boundaries and very little of it touches Littleton. We are in the process of reaching out to RTD to see how we can maybe expand that, but as of right now, very limited access to Flex Ride within the.
I might also add, that's $1.50 per ride, is that that? Yeah, I mean, and that's heavily subsidized, and RTD has huge financial issues. So they're giving away stuff, but we can't give away stuff here, well, for the most part. So even though ours is, 67 at this point, I mean, that's realistic as far as a charge
Absolutely.
that the city covers.
Yes. Correct. Looking at RTD Accessoride, did that change? That did change.
And I'm sorry, to back up on that, actually, I'm sorry. So at $67 a charge, I mean, we budgeted, what was it, 100 and whatever it was.
50,000.
Yeah, so we stayed within that limit.
We have a not to exceeds contract with VIA, and we monitor, that's why we meet every month. What are our financials looking like, how are we doing, and right now, we haven't even come close to meeting the 150,000. I think this past year, granted, we didn't ride in January and half of February, but we only incurred $113,000 in expenses.
And I guess my thought is, I just wanna make sure we're being, and Tiff is always that way, she's always budgeting things conservatively. And it sounds like we're doing that here as well.
Yeah, and I think we still have some padding, in the event again, that our demand does increase more than it did in 2021, but right now we have the cap of $150,000 per year.
And you did say monthly, though you're seeing an increase in,
We have been.
okay.
And some of that is also because some of the restrictions have eased a bit and we can offer more group rides, which again help our numbers.
And more people are comfortable leaving their homes.
Yep.
So for Accessoride, thanks to GIS, they put this map together for us. So the blue is as a bird flies, looking at the restriction that Accessoride has, in addition to having a strict qualifications to be able to get an Accessoride pass. You're only allowed to be picked up and dropped off from an address within 3/4 mile of an existing RTD route. So this map shows that the majority of the city boundaries are covered. However, you will see there are a couple of little pockets that are not within 3/4 of an existing RTD route. So there are certain addresses within our city that do not qualify for an Accessoride, even if the rider qualifies medically. The other caveat is that they only operate during RTD operation hours. So if they have an early morning or a late night, you need to go to sleep therapy and have to be at the doctor's hospital for that sleep therapy early in the morning or late at night, then they're not available for those rides.
In VIA or VIA will?
Not at this time. Yeah, so I mean, it's very similar to ours, but it's something that RTD wanted us to expressly mention.
Do they do trail mark? Is the trail mark way out on the lower left?
Yeah, it looks like they cover part of
A
Trail
little
Mark.
part of it, yep. A little piece of it.
Any questions on the options? Okay. So we'll jump down into our summary. Want to point out, again, we do still have demand. We have at least 100 community members who are actively using Omnibus, and we are seeing those numbers increase. VIA did mention on our last call that they honestly feel like it's probably going to be another 2 to 4 years before they see what they call normal. And they're still seeing folks, sure, some are getting more comfortable with coming back out, but they still feel like behavior patterns are changing, and it will probably be 2 to 4 years before they really see what the future looks like. Wanted to remind you again, Omnibus does cater exclusively to our Littleton citizens. in the senior and disabled community members. And so again, they don't have to wait on anybody else. This is something that's here just for them. And I know I was listening to the LIRC conversation and it was brought up, and that is a real nice benefit. Again, it is just for our community. Outsourcing continues to be an efficient mechanism, I think, for delivering this service. We definitely found we've been able to save money. We've been able to respond to the pandemic and have flexibility. Again, we only pay for what we actually use. It has definitely reduced the load. Not only was it our front desk who was doing the call, we had 3 drivers that we were supporting. We also had all of the fleet costs, the maintenance, the repairs, the fueling up, all of that we were doing ourselves. That now that's what they do every day, letting them focus on what they do best so that we can focus on the data, the analytics, and the relationship. So we've continued to feel like this is a great PBB program for utilizing the outsourcing. And then did want to mention again, I think to Councilmember Barr's comment, there are ways we can continue to supplement this. And so knowing that, Love Inc., for example, only will do the medical, dental, and legal, well, if we could work with Kelly's department, for example, to help advertise that, if we could shift some of our volume of the medical appointments over to Love Inc., well, that frees up more rides that other folks could use for recreation, for example. So we do feel there are ways that we could continue to supplement the Omnibus program. Looking at that Go-Go Grandparent demo or pilot program, for example, could be another one that we actually look at. But we don't feel there is an out-of-the-box turnkey solution ready that could replace this to take care of these 100 community members at this point in time. So with that said, our recommendation is to continue with VIA. Also, again, understanding we don't know what the demand is going to be, and continuing to use the data to track this, to come back to you with quarterly updates. I'm happy to provide this as part of one of Mark's Fridays updates to continue giving you some of this data, but to keep you informed of what we're seeing going on so that we can respond and actually make proactive decisions based on actual data.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions or comments? I've got a couple. No, I think the Omnibus is such an important service and resource for our community. How we treat the most vulnerable and fragile and isolated people in our community is really important, and I think this is, that connectivity that we strive to have. I've got just a couple, questions, issues with this. Is that we had 100 people that use this, and really 10 people use 63% of the service, which is, it's kind of hard to justify something for just 10 people basically, here and there. I think it would be important to get the word out. It's also these last 2 years have been tough because of COVID and everything. People have been staying at home, and so there hasn't been maybe as big of a demand to get out or desire or willingness to go out. But I think getting the word out. I met with one of my neighbors who uses the service and was instrumental in starting it back years ago. And he actually had data from 2013. He provided me that there were average of like 1,100 users a month for the Omnibus back in 2013, at least according to this sheet that's probably 9 years old.
The one thing I don't think they ever captured was unique riders.
Right. So I don't know if that's.
It could have been 10 people.
So it could have been 10 people, but we said that we had 1,600 rides.
Right.
And so this is this was number of passengers, and it's a pickup and return, so it wasn't one way, but still that's way different than what we're seeing right now.
Definitely.
Sure. And so the one concern I have is I would like to see us get the word out and reach people that need the service and don't even know about it. But also then if we have a cap on the what we're willing to spend, we're not going to get a whole lot more than these 16. We might get to 2,000 rides before we hit the 150,000. And I think seeing that the county does this and we're kind of overlapping, we're basically duplicating what they're doing. Is there a way to work with them to make sure that we can ensure the service for our residents without necessarily duplicating it? The fact that you could see 3,000 riders came from within Littleton address within the county. So I don't know if that
And that's something a conversation we actively have with VIA, and they're basically at capacity. I think we tried to include a number in there about denials as well.
It was like 500 denials.
Yes, and so knowing that they're turning away folks for their paratransit service, is basically saying that they can't absorb all of the omnibus rides on top of what they're already doing. So if we wanted to look at something like that, I still think they would ask us for some kind of financial contribution. Because with the existing, I think, staff resources they have, they couldn't absorb that additional demand. But I think they're definitely
Without
open
additional
to.
resources.
Oh,
Yeah,
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 absolutely,
right,
and
yeah.
that's definitely a conversation I think they're open to. Again, remembering, well, at least right now, how they operate, they don't cater just specifically to City of Littleton. And so we have to figure out, do they have the technology to separate that, for example, because right now we've got a different hotline. It's specific, they've got a list of all of our riders, it's all handled very separately. So I think it still would have to remain separate if we wanted to offer the same kind of service level that we do today. But definitely a conversation we could continue to have with them.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to know how many people were utilizing both the service, because, you know, if we're only going within the city, except for the 3 exemptions outside, you know, my neighbor, one of the things he said is, you know, going up to Swedish, a lot of people need to go up there. I don't know if that's where the city goes up there. So if we're not offering is that one of the places we go, or are you just not?
Is that one of
I
the?
can't remember what the third one is.
Yeah,
I know it's
okay.
Tri-County, I know it's
Okay.
like
I
Kaiser,
thought
I
it was
can't
Kaiser
remember the
Inglewood.
third. It's, I think that one, and then I can't remember the third.
Yeah, it didn't say in the
No,
packet
that's
which it was.
Swedish. Yeah.
But you know, if there's places that people need, you know, medical places that really need to get out there just outside of our service
And
boundaries,
we
that
also
would
too
be.
can get more data on all of the places that they are taking origins of City of Littleton boundaries and where they're going. So we can get that information from them as well, because I think they are right now already doing that. It's just, we're not sure what the 500 denials are, which particular rides, for example, those were. But I think their point was, yeah, they would need help from us because they couldn't absorb all of our numbers if we just had to shut down today.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I would like to see the program continue. I mean, for 100 riders, that's tough, even, you know, for just 10. But if we can look at how coming out of COVID here and see if we can expand that, that would be good. And just see what the data looks like to make a more informed decision, because honestly, it's not. These aren't the best data to make an informed decision on the last year.
Exactly. No, and they're really saying, again, it could be 2 to 4 years that you really get that, I guess, kind of future data that maybe will be, and I hate to use the word normal, but normal, which might be back to 2013 kind of what your neighbor was sharing with.
To decrease the cost though, could you look at, when you're looking at the data of times and days of the week, could you condense it to say
Absolutely.
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday,
Yes.
between 7:30 a.m. and 2:00 p.m.?
Yes,
And just take those end dates off to try to streamline a little bit.
yes. We have the flexibility to change that. As a matter of fact, that was our January meeting. They're like, hey, we've been doing this for almost a year. Do you wanna make any changes to our terms? You know, we set up initially Monday through Friday, 8 to 2. Do you wanna make any changes? And I think still not knowing a normal pattern, we thought we needed more time before we made any additional
That
changes.
data was great though, I love Power BI, awesome.
That was good.
Mr. Mayor, to your point there about communication, you know, I think the timing of this conversation is pretty good here. I also had sat in on a presentation from Tri-County Health about the Omicron and just kind of where we're at with COVID, and it is wonderful news. I mean, this is the best we've heard since I've been listening to these things. So, you know, maybe we're starting to move to the endemic. I think we all are hoping for that. So advertising and getting the word out here over the next couple of months, I think will be very important and critical here to the success of a program like this. So we do need to think about a strategy of communication.
That's when Member Ryden said that. That was news to me. And that's fantastic that you know, other areas are using it.
Yeah.
Besides our senior properties.
Well, it's still gonna be word of mouth. When it comes to social services, word of mouth is still how we operate. And someday I would like the social work profession to change and not just be like that, but right now it is very much word of mouth and just who you know and how you can get someone in quickly and get them linked up with services. And we're talking about 100 people, that is 100 citizens that we have in Littleton who don't have other places to go, right? And when we see the other folks maybe who used the Omnibus in the past, COVID hit, very resilient people, right? They found other ways to get their needs met. This is 100 people who did not find a way to get their needs met. And Omnibus is serving that purpose. And so we need to invest in that as a community.
Is there a way to work with, I mean, if you looked at the origins, it was all South Metro housing. I mean, that's where almost all of them came from.
So one of the pieces of data that VIA has started collecting, we don't have it historically, is income levels. It's voluntary, so they don't always get it, but that is something that they are starting to track. So that is something that we're hoping to get more data in, especially as we get more riders. And again, the question is actually being asked, where we hadn't asked that before. But we also, I think, could probably work with our GIS team also to take some of those origins and map them to some other GIS layers that we do have around income levels. So I think that's something we can do more research on as well.
I wasn't particularly worried about the income, but just
Okay.
just working with South Metro or housing options to
Yes,
say, hey,
absolutely.
this is a service that, we're providing this is, it's
Absolutely.
basically something that almost
Help
they
with the
could
word of
provide
mouth, yes,
themselves, it's their residents.
That too.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Very
Well, and even the idea of, trying to again, get Love Inc. advertised out there, we were even thinking, even use the Omnibus itself, and as riders are coming on, did you also know there are other options? We are looking at partnering actually with the library and working with Nancy and Claire over there, to develop more robust senior programs as well. This transportation one, I think that was another idea that we had actually is a future recommendation. Jen and I attended the, actually Dr. Mack sponsors it, but it's really focused on RTD options. And we attended 4 classes around the training they provide there. And while beneficial, it was really Denver focused and not really Littleton specific. But it really, I think, got us thinking, well, gosh, could we put together something similar to this? But again, catered to our citizens and what options do they have here actually in the city? As well as we're looking to do other, even just fraud. So one of our police officers had the idea around our seniors of, most of the victims we get for fraud really are our elderly vulnerable population. And how can we get more education around that? So we're gonna be partnering with the library this spring to hopefully offer more of that. So hoping again, this can be another option to, again, get the word out. And then obviously we've got a fantastic communications team who, I think part of where, even we had Omnibus shut down last week because of the ice storm, and we worked with Kathy Weaver to get the, the updates out on the web.
It wasn't a nice storm.
But it was, we were debating, we put it on social media, and so, but no, we do have lots and lots of options, and especially I think as we look at the age demographic and knowing that more folks who, are familiar with technology are coming up to the age of being eligible for the Omnibus, I think our options really expand as well.
You can have mandatory cyber training in the omnibus as they rise to.
There, I love you. The options, again, it's endless.
Brainwash.
I appreciate you guys looking at all these third-party options. In my mind, though, the more we invest in a single option like VIA, the lower the cost is ultimately going to be, the better the services ultimately can be, especially if we start buying into it as well and start shelling out something to fill those gaps in the service and quality. Also, they were one of the only ones that had full ADA accessibility that's not a state agency, right? To be honest, I would feel odd if we started throwing like Love Inc. in the mix as well as other things, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, who do I call for this appointment or that
It can be
appointment?
confusing.
Right, and so, honestly, given how far-reaching the VIA program already is, in my mind, I would wanna know what would it take in terms of our city's investment to get us back to those 500 and whatever, 70-something riderships denied due to lack of availability. What is the cost to fill that gap? So we're not seeing riderships denied. And then start moving forward from there to see what does that cost. But yeah, until we have more data and better ridership years, we'll figure out where that plateau is in terms of actual normal use, I guess, so.
Right.
But yeah, I would say not spreading like too many other options around, but seeing how we can bolster VIA to provide those options instead would be my preference, honestly.
Love Inc. could be a filler.
I'm not trying to like knock the nonprofits that are doing it for free. It's awesome that they are. I just know that when you have multiple placards and cards and stuff like that, who do I call for that one thing? Oh wait, they don't take my wheelchair, that gets complex.
Well, it sounds like there's consensus, there's no dissent about.
Thank you, Mayor.
So,
That's, that was gonna be my next question, reaffirm.
Yes, I'm gonna reaffirm the consensus that, okay, we'll go with recommendation. All right.
Thank
you.
for data.
That was
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, that data's
Yeah,
cool.
thank you.
I love those charts, like with the colors, it
All right,
was cool.
let's take a 5-minute break.
Woohoo.
We're back at 8:25 for the last portion.
Gotta check the Olympics.
Emergency management contract. That's crazy.
But it's parsed out through different staff members.
But usually like, I don't know.
And the chit chat, huh?
Just.
Wait for the, I don't know, if we live for the flag.
Can we put a request for the type of LaCroix that we like?
Yes.
To who?
Talk to Becky.
Yeah. Lucy.
Lucy,
Oh,
I'm
no.
like, Becky, no.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, you might not get anything if you talk to Becky.
Lucy. Colleen would be. I was thinking Colleen, actually.
Okay, we're good. All right, so, last on the, agenda tonight is to kind of, prep for the retreat this weekend, which is, Friday and Saturday. And so this is gonna be our, developing our work plan, so council can, work towards, outcomes in the comprehensive plan, but also build for the budget. And we're gonna go through all the different goals and objectives over the 2 days. And one of the things I want to do today, and we'll turn it over to Mark, is kind of just think about what, if the goals and objectives that are there for the city that were there last year and are proposed for this year, if they're what we want, if there's anything we want to change, if there's anything we want to add new to it, so we can talk about that tonight a little bit. But I'm going to turn it over to Mark and Kathleen and Sama to kind of prepare us for what is going to happen this weekend, somewhat.
Okay, yeah, all right, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so we're gonna spend just a few minutes here this evening, kind of what we would call preparation for the retreat. And I've got a PowerPoint presentation here that City Manager's Office put together here, just so we can talk through this a little bit and basically get everybody on the same page here as we step into the retreat. So I think one of the things that I think it's important to just kind of acknowledge here this evening is just why do we even do this? So I think it's for many reasons. I think that it's a very strategic approach about how you might connect what each council member has and their own vision of the community and bring you together and to find consensus around the things that you believe are the most important for us to address. And so that is one of the biggest responsibilities of the city council, and we do that once a year. And we don't accomplish all things in basically a 2-day retreat. I think that you have an opportunity here to identify what are the major goals and talk through why is this important, why are we doing this, whether it's financial sustainability, environmental stewardship, or affordable housing. All those are goals that the previous council has flagged and we've made progress on over time. You have an opportunity to kind of reaffirm, why are we doing this? What are the objectives we're trying to accomplish behind that? We've been putting this together here for the last few years, and let's go to the next slide. I want to just talk about this. When I first came here, one of the things that I acknowledged with council and we talked through is that it had been some good work trying to put together what I would call a more traditional strategic plan. Goals, the objectives behind the goals, and then very specific action steps. But they weren't necessarily real clear, and they were sometimes mixed between goals, objectives, and action steps in kind of a bigger list. There was a very loose connection to the budget, and there was basically no reporting back to the city council on our progress with that. So we picked up that work that had begun, and we took it to the next stage with that. So here's kind of a timeline of some of the things that we've kind of accomplished through that. And the real goal here is that we've been trying to be very strategic about our approach here. And so we did, we're specific about goals, objectives, and clear action steps. And we did look at multiple years, at least 2 years. And we created in 2017, the first work plan out of that council retreat. And the year that followed that is that we put it into a timeline in my famous Gantt chart. And I think this was an attempt here so that there was a conversation with city council. So as you looked at the action steps over time, we were able to kind of plot that based on the organization's capacity. And you could see when things would actually happen. So we would set the expectation early on. And so council also then, during the retreat, of course, we'd go through all this work. After the retreat, staff would take the information and we would actually then suggest some very specific action steps. So when we meet here this weekend, you don't have to think in terms that every single action step is going to be identified in that 2 days. In fact, I'm gonna suggest that you stay at the higher policy level. You reaffirm why we're taking on these goals. Talk through some of the specific objectives you'd like to accomplish through each of those goals. In some cases, yes, we're gonna be asking for very specific action steps for you to consider. I think one example of that, quite honestly, is around the arts and culture. We've been talking about a lodging tax. That is an action step that council could direct us to pursue. So the retreat, we're gonna talk about this. Eventually, we'll bring all that back through the spring, and there'll be a date and time when we're gonna present this to you with the resources behind it that's gonna be necessary to execute it, and you're gonna be asked to approve it formally by resolution. That will be your goals, your work plan for the given year. The importance of that then is that as you look over time, we've been able to take that and actually put it into the budget process. And so as you formalize your goals and your objectives here and the action steps we're taking, staff's reaffirming what that's gonna look like through the budget the following year. So we're gonna be asking this year, of course, we'll come back again eventually in the spring, ask you to, reaffirm and approve your work plan. Staff will take that into the budget process that we begin for the 2023 budget. We begin that in May. So we go through an internal process to start looking at our expenditures, your goals, objectives. We start looking at how that's gonna play out in the year to come here for the budget. Now, we've also been able to put together some dashboards. And so one of the other important pieces of any kind of strategic plan, in my opinion, is to be able to come back to council periodically and report on our progress. So you don't just do this once, we come back quarterly and show you, here's where you're at in your goals, the Gantt chart. In essence, where are we at as a percent of completion? Are we meeting the target or not? Things change for a variety of different reasons here. And so a budget is a good example. It's a planning document. It's not carved in stone. It's a planning document. And so we're trying to align it with your goals. And so as we report out, if we're making progress, one way or the other with a specific goal, do we need to somehow adjust the resource? So that's always part of the conversation when we go through this kind of process here. And we've put together a public-facing dashboard, by the way, and I don't know if you've had a chance to peruse that, but the intent is that we take all this information and we share it with our community. We show them our progress in real time. Okay, so the next. So what kind of ties this all together here? So I've kind of laid out, certainly where the retreat, we start this weekend, we talk about goals, a strategic planning approach, we tie it to the budget. Eventually that approval of the budget by council goes into the different departments, and that influences our service plans for each department, whether it's public works, the police department, community development. And so each one of those departments then respond by the budget to meet your goals. Well, then, of course, for us then, this is the piece of the operations you don't get to see really in great detail, is those service plans then are actually down to individual goals. So work down into each of the divisions of every department. Then we'll see typically implementation of your goals. Well, one of the pieces that we've been trying to pursue here in the last few years, of course, is our measurement, review, and analysis. And then, quite honestly, our Omnibus conversation is a classic example of completing this process. So we go through, you make some decisions about a strategic approach to service level. We come back to you and show you, well, here's where we're at and the measurement of that. Are we hitting the target? And so eventually it translates into process improvement. So that's the other piece to kind of complete this whole thing. And then when we come back in, the February of next year, we're gonna do this all over again. And so we step back with council, we reaffirm where you're at with your goals, your objectives, and we reconnect with all these different steps here. At the center of this whole thing, one of the key pieces that we've been working on the last few years is the mission, vision, values of this organization. We've never formalized that here. And so we've been working hard on this issue here for the last couple of years. Noelle Mink, our HR director, kind of leads the leadership team in this effort here. She's gonna come back in May and she's gonna report out where we're at on that specific effort. But all this connects. This is what we call our leadership framework. This is the ability to kind of connect all this. This is how we've been communicating this internally and to our community. So as part of this process, one of the most important pieces that we need to communicate as staff back to the city council is the capacity of this organization. As I'm keen to say, we can't do all things all at once. And so it is a conversation about what are the real priorities of city council. And so we try to take your goals, your objectives, and then we line it up with what we believe are reasonable action steps that we would propose to the council based on existing resources, or in some cases, we may have to bring in expertise or consultants or whatever it might be in order to accomplish that. And again, we're looking in terms of a 2-year period. That's what I'm highly recommending to you. Think beyond 1 year. Try to think in terms of 2 year. One real good example of that, quite honestly, is the ULUC. We've been pursuing that for over 4 years. So that's been a council goal for over 4 years. Very specific objectives, very specific action steps. We've been reporting to council every single year on the progress of that. And it has translated into, multiple opportunities to kind of report out to council. One of the most important things that I would share with city council and why all this is important is not only just the routine of it all and how it all connects to the budget, the conversations, how we figure capacity into this, but it takes, in order to make lasting change, as you want to make change in your community over time and you want it to stick, it takes political discipline, in my opinion. I've used this term before, for not just the council, but for the entire organization to kind of stick with this process so that we can work through the details of a work plan and communicate it back to our community. It's not to say you can't change things. It's just to say if you want to make lasting change with big issues, ULUC is an example of that, it's going to take multiple councils over time. And so how you all interact at the retreat to reinforce some of those bigger goals is really key. It's key to the success of city council as a group and certainly to our community in trying to understand how are you going to make lasting change with certain topics. So the capacity conversation, I think, here for this go around is going to be a little more unique than what we've seen in the past. Actually, the past 2 years has been awful. Simply because of COVID and what we've been to. In fact, I remember in 2020, in February of 2020, we had a great retreat. And for those who were on the council at the time, you can remember we talked through all the goals, the objectives, and we had a plan, we were ready to go. And it wasn't a matter of a few weeks later and the pandemic hit. It was all gone. So we were in a firefighting mode. And at that point in time, we're having a conversation we had to cut. And so a lot of those goals and objectives we had to set aside. However, there were a few that the council clearly articulated as direction we must complete. So we figured a way. And so that's the kind of conversation, you can have, year over year, depending on the circumstances. Now that was pretty extreme, I admit. But the ULUC was one clear example. Coming out of the pandemic, the council said, we must complete this. Let's see here. So I think there's a couple of points here that, may sound obvious, but I think become, in my opinion, probably pretty meaningful this time around here. So when we talk about the capacity here of really the community, there's several things that kind of influence this. We have a lot of things that can go on. And in a work plan, you need to think about how strategically you spread that out over time with the community, so they don't feel like they're being overwhelmed in a matter of short period of time. Because if you keep asking them to go over and over at multiple meetings in a short period of time, eventually they're going to be less engaged. So you have to think in terms of how do you spread this out to keep their level of interest, their engagement. And we put this systematic development of informed consent. This is many of you know this, I'm a disciple of Hans Bleicher, who has promoted this kind of approach for a very long time. But the basic premise behind this is that in order for us to be successful, and as we look at goals and objectives, one of the questions you really need to understand and answer is what is the problem we're trying to address? So as we step into the retreat here this weekend, I would suggest that we all think about that. As you talk about any goal, what is the real problem we're trying to address here? Because I do believe that's an opportunity for us to be much more successful. Once we have consensus around the problem, and that's the basic premise behind SDIC, once you understand and can communicate the problem, then you are much more likely to be successful in finding the solution. And councils over the past several years, we've used this in multiple instances, whether it was the fire issue and our lack of financial resources to maintain our own fire department, or quite honestly, just recently with the capital project fund and the ballot issue around 3A. We had a problem. We communicated that to our community. So how you mix all this and communicate this in the capacity conversation is very, very critical.
Isn't that an Einstein quote, right? If he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 59 minutes, right, describing it and defining it, and 1 minute solving it.
Well, could be.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe Hans Leckers stole it from Einstein, I don't know. Yeah, so I think it's, again, I just love retreats, by the way. I think it's an opportunity for all of us, especially the council, to kind of step back and wrestle with these why questions. Why are we doing this, and what's the problem we're trying to address? And for all of you to come together. This is your retreat. It's not mine or the staff's. Now, I need certain things out of the retreat, but don't expect to solve all things in 2 days, because you are very likely to flag something and say, we're gonna need more conversation. That's when we will spin it off to a study session. We'll answer the question. We'll put that back into the work plan when we address the issues. One of the things that I think that COVID has taught us, at least internally as staff, is that resources we've always known are limited. But when it came to managing the pandemic and the rest of the work, we got a real education about what was going on and what's the true cost of maintaining the services. So staff has done in fact, you have in your binder, is there a reference here I can use as an example?
Sure, if you look to tab 3 for that innovative infrastructure goal.
I didn't bring my book.
Yeah, it's very fancy binder. Well, I'll pull one up here for you. You've got a nice big demonstration of what some of our current projects are, and there's this red line that shows where our capacity is.
Yeah, I know, Pam, sorry at home there that you can't see that very well, but I would highly recommend. Oh, yeah, very good, very good. I think it's an example where staff has taken the time to try to estimate what's the resource that we're using now just to keep the lights on. That's been our phrase here internally. And so you're gonna be able to see here that multiple departments have kind of taken that effort here to kind of lay out what they believe are the resources just to maintain the basics here. That leaves, the question then is, what's the capacity left for us to manage kind of the rest of the goals? And so we've been trying to do this analysis so we can tie that back into the goal discussion. It's a lot more detail than you probably need to look at, now certainly. But I think it's just an example of when we get into the conversation about capacity and your goal and when to do what over time, it's this kind of analysis that's influencing our recommendations. It's what we think we can handle. And there's a couple of departments that probably won't surprise you who are really consumed by your goals. And especially with the recent success we've had with the ULUC and certainly 3A. So community development and public works. You're gonna see in the discussion here that we have with council, their departments that are really gonna be consumed around those issues. And so their capacity is gonna be limited to take on additional things. Now, other goals, and we're gonna have a discussion here in a little bit, if there's other things the council wants to consider, we can certainly talk about it tonight and certainly at the retreat. And I'll get to that in a minute here about what that can look like. But one example I know that I've heard from a couple of you is that if there's an issue, say that the council wants to pursue a goal around public safety, as an example. That's one department, the police department, that probably has capacity to take on some of that at some level. Depends on what it is, of course. If in the issue of environmental stewardship, you're gonna hear from Public Works that they're consumed with 3A and a lot of the basics here in order to gear up for a pretty substantial capital program. So environmental stewardship, we just have to recognize is gonna have to take maybe a second tier later in time more than anything else. Public Works needs the resources and time to kind of gear up for the capital issue.
The attorney's office should have plenty of capacity to take some of those things on.
We'll get right to it.
Yeah, in fact, you know, the capacity, every single department, including the city attorney's office, is deeply involved in all of this analysis we're trying to lay out so that we understand what are the resources necessary, whether the consultants or contract attorneys, you know, that we need to bring in to make sure that we can accomplish your goals in the timeline we promise you. What else do I need to touch on the capacity issue?
Well, we talk a lot about, you know, kind of, you know, keeping the lights on, what we need to do as an organization to do just the everyday routine things. You know, we've talked about community development, getting them involved, and perhaps, you know, housing and sustainability to a certain extent, but they've got applications coming in. They have, you know, those types of things. We talk about Public Works with all the infrastructure improvements that they're gonna be doing, so a lot of it is just stuff that we do every day, that we need to do every day outside of kind of that special, huge project that's, I know is really important to the community and council members, but how do we fit that in and just kind of budget our own time so that we're not making promises that we can't keep. And at the end of the day, it's to make council successful. So how do we manage that, put that out there in such a way so that council's finding the success that they need, that council's able to go back to your constituents that you campaigned in front of, that you know, you've got the information, you know what's important to them, a lot of your constituents. And so how does council as an organization, as a body, be able to deliver on those things? So it's just kind of a balancing act as we go through kind of the resources, the limited resources that we have. And sometimes we have a lot of resources, but we don't have a lot of different types of resources. So that could be staff, sometimes that's money, as we've seen in the past. So how do we do that?
Yeah, unexpected or unrealistic expectations set everyone up for failure.
Yeah, and we've worked hard here in the last few years, staff and council, to make sure that, you know, our expectations are we're trying to be realistic about it. None of us really like to overpromise. I think COVID has made that very difficult at times to try to deliver. And so I think that's why, you know, this time around, coming out of the pandemic, I really feel it. And I think it is an opportunity for us to kind of step back and just recognize that, you know, capacity is limited. And so if council really does want something, we're just gonna have to work with you to figure out, well, how do we balance the resources and maybe move something else out or move it around to free up that opportunity for you?
Well, that's where the Gantt charts come in,
That's right.
and that's why they're so important.
Well,
Yeah, you can add whatever we want, but something is affected.
That's right. And, you know, I think the council's really been very supportive of this conversation over time here, so that when we come to you, we are trying to show you how the capacity lines up in a Gantt chart. Doesn't have to be a Gantt chart, but that's what I like. And so I think it's one of those tools that you can visually see how things are kind of connected over time. I guess that's kind of why I like it. Typical project management approach. It's the engineer in me, I still can't shake it.
Starting in July, we'll call it the Ralph chart.
Yeah, a couple of the other things we've talked about in capacity, you know, Mark touched on community capacity here. One of the things is we ask for a lot of volunteers out of our community as we do boards and commissions, and we've seen a lower level of applications this year. So we want to be thoughtful as we both ask for engagement and processes with our community and volunteer opportunities. And we also want to be thoughtful about council's capacity.
How many applications did we get, by the way?
I believe the final number was in the low 40s.
47, I thought. Is it?
47.
Colleen said.
Yeah, I think it was 47.
What did we have last year?
In the 60s.
Of which I was not selected.
Twice.
Review
criteria.
Continue.
You brought it up.
Capacity conversations. Council has a particularly large task this year in city manager recruitment, and so we want to be conscious of the council capacity as we put this work plan forward as well.
Yeah. Well, I think when I talk about this political discipline, one of the things that we talked with the council about, several years ago when we were talking about a code change is we wrestled with, well, what is the vision of the community? We didn't have a formal document. We never had this formal conversation trying to identify what is that vision here for us to kind of hang on to, for us to use ultimately in the development of policy. That's where the comp plan came from. And so that's why we've been on this 4-year journey. And this is how you make lasting change politically that stays with the community over time, is to think through strategically the kinds of questions you need to address, the why. Well, in the case of a code, we were talking about, well, we all knew we had to update our development code. It was for lots of different reasons. So the question came back, well, okay, what is this code gonna look like? What are the values we're trying to reflect in essence? So that's why we started with a community vision. That's why we had that process, is to engage our community to talk about, well, what's important to us? So as you read kind of those bullet points here, those are some of the main issues that we clearly heard from our community. And what I'm recommending to you is don't forget those. We must hang on to this. This is a very valuable document. We'll come back at some interval, 10 years or longer, and we'll come back and reassess and check it again with our community. But this is the first time we've had a formally adopted, formally engaged with our community vision, statement, formal document. And so obviously there's some things in here that, maintain the integrity and establish the neighborhoods and historic areas. The council acted on this in the development of the comprehensive plan. You adopted a new ULUC that had respected community character. Your historic district came out of the comprehensive plan. So all of these vision statements are important to hang on to and have influenced, of course, the comp plan. Ultimately, I'm recommending for lasting change is you update that and you act on that comp plan. There are policy statements, and we are, as staff, doing our best to share those with you as you have your conversations about goals and objectives. That's a policy document. For years, you could be working on the statements that come out of that comp plan. I think the opportunity is to try to use those strategically and figure out, well, what's next? We took on the ULUC. In fact, we have a nice slide. Done, checked off. Next.
But it's not done.
No, well, we're gonna talk about that. So it's never really done.
No.
You're always
Yeah.
kind of focusing
Right.
on refinements of that.
I mean, we thought we were done 40 years ago.
Yes.
We don't want to do that.
I think
Some of us were born 40 years
Some of us
ago.
were born. We're done 40 years.
And actually, Jerry makes a great point that you can't lose sight of, is that in the ULUC, it's a new format, it's a new lots of things. It's never done. There's always this review process that you go through to make sure you update that in a regular fashion. In fact, we're gonna talk to you about that at the retreat. We also know that the comp plan needs to go back and kind of reestablish, is it correct every 5 years? And then if there are modifications to the comp plan, great. Well, then how does that reflect into the other policies that you've been pursuing, your goals and your objectives? So this is the discipline it takes in order to make lasting change in a community over time. Okay. So I'm not gonna go in great detail with this here. We've put together a binder and we've made some suggestions about what possible objectives may be tied to some of these goals. In some cases, it's a carryover from the previous conversation. So if you take financial sustainability, for example, you're gonna see some pretty common things we've been talking about. Out of that came a lot of conversation about, our capital project fund, other revenue strategies here, so we're not just relying upon sales tax. We'll continue to have those conversations. So financial sustainability, you'll see some, common objectives from the past. Well, environmental stewardship is new. So we have some objectives to recommend, but that's one that's gonna take more conversation. Housing and livability, clearly, in our opinion as staff, we want you to engage in the conversation of why. Why are we taking this on? And we have some suggestions about what the objectives could be. In the case of housing, we all know that if this is the council goal, you're never done with it. It's always reassessing, measuring your success, collecting data, trying to readjust. And so we're gonna be suggesting, you know, some objectives around that. So the ULUC, at least done at the goal level. We have maintenance to do, which we'll talk about under good governance, I believe is where we captured it. So we'll just, you know, we need to update that on a regular basis. And I know council wants to talk about the ULUC a bit. So I want to just pause here for a minute, because one of the opportunities here, I think, for council at a retreat is to talk about all goals. And so obviously, you know, these are the ones we're suggesting and a carryover from previous conversations, and we have momentum going. Our community's been hearing about it. We've been communicating that. But I also think it's an opportunity for the council to talk about, well, are there other things that perhaps, you know, are important to you that you want to discuss in some form? And you have an opportunity this evening. You'll certainly have an opportunity at the retreat Friday at noon, I think, is a working lunch. So as part of a packet we just handed out, it's either in your binder, in this little folder here, if you picked it up recently, or it came loose. And let's see, mine's loose.
Yours, right there.
Yeah. One of the things, we have just a quick little flyer on Geneva Village. We're gonna discuss, you know, some issues around that under housing and livability goal. And so this basically came off our webpage and gives you kind of a quick summary of kind of the history of that. And then one of the other things I want to specifically point out is that the mayor put together, you know, some other examples of what other cities across the country have identified as goals and objectives. And so you have an opportunity to look at that, certainly before the retreat here on Friday and Saturday. But if you did want to spend a little bit of time right now kind of talking about what other interests, other goals that perhaps are worth discussing.
Yeah, so when I was looking at the list of our goals, it made me think of, you know, what are other communities doing? Not that we need to copy them or do exactly what they're doing, but take advice of something that maybe we're not thinking of or think of it a different way. So I just went through and looked at what goals there are, what council goals had, and, you know, at least lining them up. You know, I think our 7 goals kind of fit well within what's here. I didn't see really anything that was sticking out. You know, I was originally thinking of this, I was thinking having, you know, the new city manager could be a standalone goal. You know, I think that would either be number 1, you know, when we talked, I think, you know, Sam had mentioned that's gonna be good governance, is that having there? Yeah. And so, but it's, I mean, it's really up to us to say, how do we wanna do it? Do we wanna pull something out separately? Do we wanna put it in another goal as an objective there, rework some things? So I don't know if anyone else has given any thought to if there's other goals that we should have as a council. Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, one of the goals, I have several to consider. One of them, of course, was getting a new manager on board. That's a big one. But developing our economic department, bringing it up to what we really need, because in this environment, everything is changing so much business-wise. I really think that we need to make sure that we look at our economic department. That could be under financial sustainability. But I definitely think our economic department is gonna play a bigger role going forward. And I think that falls under you, if I'm not mistaken. So I really think, council, that we need to give this some attention.
And that's where it has been in the current work plan and how staff is proposing that, is under that financial sustainability with the intent to sort of set the stage and work on a strategic plan in 2023 to implement that, and knowing that that's an addition that's coming. I think we're in a full reboot. I think all of you know that. And so, you know, we've got interviews scheduled this week to rebuild the team. So I think that opportunity to get that in place in 2022 and then work on that strategic plan. I think I would welcome a conversation about how and what council thinks they could influence in that economic development. Really, to Mark's earlier point, that question about why, because I think that would be incredibly helpful for Cindy Perry and now the team that she's building to understand what we would like to almost measure right? Because when you have that conversation about why, then we really clearly understand, okay, so if we set a benchmark here, what can we measure over time to ensure that you're seeing the type of success that you want? Or if you wanna look at refinements, then we know how to kind of massage that moving forward.
So that's when I don't know how it should probably fall under financial sustainability, but is it gonna be a bullet within there?
That's how it has been in the past.
That's where we'll have, okay, cool. Another item that I thought would be important too would develop a strategy for catching up on our deferred maintenance. I know 3A is a big part of that, but we need to have a good plan that's gonna get us there. It just doesn't happen overnight, and it's a multi-year thing, but I think it's something we need to put down as a goal. How are we gonna catch up on our deferred maintenance? We have lots of deferred maintenance, I think everybody's aware of that, with our buildings, our streets, and other places. I think we need to have, with Keith Reister, develop a plan, and we need to have that as a goal. What are our milestones? Did we reach our targets? Did we hit those milestones? So I think that's an important goal that we need to have, and it needs to be specific.
Staff would certainly welcome that conversation.
Another one I have is implementing the police department personal camera devices. That's under Senate Bill 217, whatever it is. That's another huge one. I think, Reed, what do we have, 1 year left to get that done, 2 years?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
Yeah, so I think that's big. That's a huge issue that we gotta have. It's a state mandate. We need to have it down as one of our goals to make it happen sooner rather than later for lots of reasons, I think. And it didn't come with money, that mandate.
No, we were successful in getting some state grants for that, but yeah, we do have a reporting responsibility back to council on this one.
And I think that would make a good sense to go under good governance there.
Probably so, yeah, but it's gotta be a bullet in there.
Complying with,
Yeah.
State laws,
Yeah.
requirements, yeah.
Another one I have, and I know it's relatively sensitive at this point, is the developing the water treatment district plan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have.
And I'm not sure how much council knows about that yet. So I know it's been kind of
It's actually on the council's tentative calendar. What's the date, Kathleen or Sama, do you remember? Keith? Pardon me?
17th.
March, the 8th,
Second meeting in March, okay.
right? Because I think March 1st is a Tuesday, right?
So where would we put that down? Do we have it under existing goals now, or is it a goal that we should consider adding?
Yeah, I think that one is, this is probably an example where we flag it, have more conversation after the retreat, and then see where council wants to take it. This has to do with the ownership of the wastewater treatment plant with the city of Inglewood. And so the question that some of council have asked is the current structure between us and Inglewood, is that really in the city's best interest to maintain that co-ownership, or is there some other approach to this? There's also another issue we're gonna couple with that, where we have Dominion Water and Sand, who are looking at sewer service, extending it from areas of the south, basically Sterling Ranch, all the way to our wastewater treatment plant. And so we're gonna couple that conversation. And because it could influence the council's decision on where they wanna take this options on the wastewater treatment plant. So
to be determined.
To be determined.
Yeah, I mean, some things will just have to be pigeonholed. Yeah. And two others. Finalizing the transfer of property for South Metro Fire. Like we still have the fire station here, but when does that lease up?
I talked to the fire department about that last fall and reminded them that our contract anticipated them to be out of that within 5 years. So that is a conversation yet to be finished, Jerry.
And that's something I think all council needs to be brought up to speed on. The things I'm bringing up aren't necessarily things that need to be gold. Everybody has to be on board with them though to understand what's going on, like the water treatment plant or this. Right. And last but not least, I think this is the most important one. It falls probably under financial sustainability, would be building back our reserves. I think we're down to about 2% or 7%, and we need to be at 18%. So it's terrible where we are. If COVID were to hit another thing that like a COVID hit us again, we're in deep yogurt. We were fortunate we had enough reserves to carry us over for much of this stuff over the last several years. But we have got to build this thing up aggressively back to 18%.
Yeah, I think it's a good conversation to talk about at the retreat a little bit, and Tiffany here?
Yep,
Oh, there's Tiffany. Yeah, so I think, we have policies in place, I think, and we won't necessarily answer all things again in 2 days, but I think it is an opportunity to kind of talk through, where are we at financially when it comes to the reserve issue? Do we feel comfortable kind of managing unexpected consequences like the pandemic here, lessons learned, clearly? So we certainly can report on where we're at. The good news is that our sales tax continues to increase, so the possibility of increasing the reserve certainly is in a much better place than it was, say, a year ago.
In my opinion, we need a plan. We need a plan to get there. We just can't say, oh, things are looking good. Got to have a plan. Cool. I think that was all the additional items that I have at this point.
Great. Councilmember Grove, you have your hand up.
Okay, couple things. ULUC, as you know, near and dear to my heart, and I see there's some changes that need to be made, and I had a whole list of changes that either fell into policy issues or were administrative and still need to be kind of dealt with. I think a couple big things are going on. One is the master development plan still does not require a public hearing, and I think that needs to be addressed, and everything that goes with that, and council getting involved in that. I also think that we've seen pushback from the community on this petition. I wasn't here last week, but I know what council voted to go ahead and put that to the voters. But what we're going to see is going under the ULUC, we still have 9 stories and quite a bit of density, and what a good percentage of our citizens have told us through petition, and we'll know more when this gets voted on, is that that level of density and sacrificing our view corridors and that impact on our traffic and community doesn't live up to one of the values of integrity. So that, I think, maybe we don't skip over the ULUC quite so much, but do spend some time, and if that's under goal 1 or 8, that's fine. Another thing, when we get to affordable housing, which goes under, let me go back to arts and culture. Arts and culture, I think we want to talk about the lodging tax as part of that. And then we've got this art and culture commission. I think it's get up and running. It has a very ambitious plan. I think COVID has affected things. So kind of where are we in terms of implementing our arts and culture goal, and where do we fit and where does the commission fit, and a discussion around that. Housing and livability. I would like to see some real direction for Geneva Village. You say the word Geneva Village, and we have people that live there, people that support the people that live there, get very nervous and scared, and I think we need to have a plan. And maybe it's not done in the retreat, but maybe it's a study session is set so that there's some predictability and people can know what's going to happen, and there's not this fear factor that comes up every 3 to 6 months. So I would like us, and you provided a good background for that. I think it's been a kick the can situation. People have kicked it, and so it's easy not to do under our watch. And I think we've seen council now is ready to tackle some of the hard issues, like we've done with the ULUC, which was a very horrendous task that council worked on. Staff did it and council worked on it, and also with the 3A initiative, with the historic district. I mean, we've done some really good work and hard work, and we've taken these things, and I think we can do something about them and come to some conclusion and move forward with some strategy. Another one I think would be, I understand about capacity and the Public Works Department, especially given 3A, especially with our fleets and our maintenance. But environmental stewardship has always been an area of interest to our constituents. And if there's a way to harness volunteers, and I know we do a lot, and when Keith put together that spreadsheet that showed the things that maybe we weren't aware of, but is there a way that we could bite off something in terms of moving that goal forward with some concrete programs, composting or whatever, something that is just a little bit more focused than what we've done in the past. And we may not be able to based on capacity, but it's come up over and over again. It's such a passion in the community. I'd like to see if there's something we could do to address it. So that's my two. Oh, downtown. Where's downtown? Oh, downtown. Goal 4. We're looking at new management structure, parking, but now we have this new historic district. And what does that mean? And what do we need to do in terms of any kind of policy around that, if anything? And how do we address, now that we have this historic district, how do we support the outlying areas, the greater downtown district, and have it all working together so that it works in harmony and one supports the other? So those are some thoughts I have around the goals that we're going to be working on this weekend.
So it sounds like that a lot of conversation for this weekend, not anything to necessarily add or change drastically. Have like a brand new goal or something, but
brand new goal, but maybe moving some of this forward further than it's gone before. That's my point. Instead of just saying, oh, we have a downtown historical district, check. Let's maybe have some conversation on what does that mean, where does it look, so that we're making some headway on some of these things in the ways that I just mentioned.
Yeah, no, I agree. Have to be careful too about some of these things, like diving deeper into policy versus the actual tactics of day-to-day operations for some of the things, like specifically with the LUC. But
some of the things, ULUC is not something that we'll talk about unless it's the master development plan. I think is big enough, but some of the other things is just, are these things that are going to be maybe put as study sessions sooner rather than later? Is this something we're going to address this year, next year? How much effort do we want to put towards that? Staying kind of at the high level, but pushing forward on some of these objectives and goals.
Great, thanks. Anything else from anyone else?
Yeah, I have a goal maybe that's part of a good governance. When we had the presentation on our ADA plan a couple weeks ago, and then from the ARC, got me thinking more about equity. And I think it would behoove us to look at our policies and seeing, are our policies equitable? And maybe talk to HR about that. And maybe it's a very high level conversation, but seeing if that could get in our work plan for the next couple of years. Delivering, and certainly the mayor's, certainly that could be an outcome. Create an equity plan that just looks at our policies.
Yeah, I had the same thought. I don't know if it could be a standalone goal or good governance, it fits in there. That makes a lot of sense to put in there.
Yeah, I mean, actually, similar to that, I was having trouble fitting some of the objectives under these goal headings only because I felt like one was kind of lacking, which was citizen health and well-being, and a lot of things kind of get sporadically picked up under safety. It's not really issues of safety, but really issues of livability, things like that, and connectivity to services. So when we're talking about issues of equity, when we're talking about the Tri-County or the Tri-City Homelessness Initiative, it doesn't necessarily fall into, at least in my mind, a goal of safety rather than like, are we taking care of ourselves and each other? Because also coming out of this, we have a big temporary bucket of money that is the ARPA funds that are specifically set aside for citizen well-being. And that can take like a whole lot of different forms. But I just I was struggling to fit something into those goal headings that specifically addressed a person's I mean, even the Omnibus program, for example, doesn't necessarily fit under good governance or safety, but it is something that dramatically improves the quality of life. So maybe we need a goal that really encompasses more of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of these other cities' goals, I mean, when I look at it, safe for safety is in 5 of the 7 cities there. One of them is strengthen public safety and improve quality of life, which is,
Quality of life is a great way to phrase it, safety being one issue as measures of prevention or kind of mechanisms, but the other is more of a holistic overview of how are we doing. And there's a lot, I think, objective-wise that we could fit into something like that.
I would agree with all of that. I'll just add city manager recruitment. That was my number 1 goal.
Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up.
I have others to add.
That's your objective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that we don't explicitly hit on in any of these things is that idea of safety, and safety is important to our community, as is quality of life, which is in the comprehensive plan quite a bit there, expressing that. That was one of the common themes here. 2 things I saw that struck me as interesting. One is recruit and retain high quality staff, which goes towards the city manager recruitment. I think we can have that not just focus on the city manager, but obviously that's priority number 1 of recruiting staff. But I think that fits well within good governance. For the Department of Agriculture where I work, we have these big goals, wildly important goals, and so it's a little different, direction than kind of just general overview. It's like, hey, let's really set it to, wildly, audacious, reach for the stars. One of the things I saw was at Dublin, Ohio, was become the most connected community in the U.S. And I'm like, well, that's an interesting, goal. I would be interested in having a conversation about making some of our goals a little more, aspirational. I was saying, hey, okay, housing and livability, okay, but what do we want to do? Why are we doing that? How are we going to get there? What's the whole? What are we looking for there?
Is that more of a vision though?
It could, that could be part of it.
Because I'm thinking years ago when we had 10 years in homelessness, that was a ridiculous goal that it was going to happen, because it didn't happen, come close, it got worse.
Right.
So we don't want to set ourselves up for failure. We want to give ourselves goals that are attainable and good for the community. I think to set visions is important. Yeah, to have flying cars by the year whatever, but that's a vision, but not necessarily a goal.
Depends how you set up, the mission, vision and goals statement. It's the vision is what you see it as, and the goal is what you are hoping to get to. So if you it just depends on what you want to do.
I kind of like the way you're setting that up. For example, like instead of rotating out a goal when said thing is complete, to me that always falls in line with what an objective is, and saying, but housing, for example, as the goal, safe, affordable, sustainable, high quality housing for a diversity of residents. But an objective under that being, and ending homelessness, right, that maybe, or cut homelessness in half as a more concrete objective. So I kind of like the idea of goals being, I don't know, not like flying car aspirational, but, pushing us further, something that doesn't necessarily get completed. Objectives get completed, but goals kind of remain that lofty push to, what we strive for in years to come.
Because in theory, none of these are really going to go, be taken off. We're never going to really, the LUC was something that was very, direct and explicit of what you can accomplish. But all the other things, you can't accomplish housing. It's just, unless you become a community that has no housing and it's all just business, then you don't really need it.
That's why we have to discuss it to find out, what is our goal regarding housing and livability? Something that is obtainable and helpful to our community. It's great to have a vision like, we're going to end it, cut it in half, but if we don't have a plan that's realistic, that we're going to chip away at it, that's what we got. That's the goal.
Yeah,
got to have a goal.
Yeah.
And when we talked about this as a leadership team when we had our retreat, we talked about, are these really more topics? Some of them are clearly goals, but some of them are probably larger topics that are going to have a bunch of individual type of, objectives that can be readily accomplished within those. And so how those how council decides to put those together as we kind of flesh out things in our retreat will be helpful in getting those measurables in place, so we can see, as Mark said, we need to define what it is that we're doing and how we're getting there so that we can come back to you in 6 months, 8 months, however long it is, and say, this is where we're at. So.
Thanks, Reed.
And I think to Mark's earlier point, right, of looking at that comprehensive plan on that regular schedule, right, that would mean that it would be before council in 2025. So this is an opportunity too to say, how can we prepare the community to engage in that conversation? Where do we have gaps? Where do we think we could dig in a little bit harder? Where do we think we could better define? Also have some of that data to kind of see what those metrics are, how we're measuring progress, so that you can really have a very robust conversation that probably broadens how the community engages and what they see. I would imagine we'd be planning roughly on a 2050 horizon. And so, we did about a 20-year horizon with the last comprehensive plan, so increasing that slowly, right, to about a 25-year horizon. But I do think that this moment in time is a really great opportunity for us to flag all of those things and then be able to go back and have that conversation, vet those with the community, and have them weigh in so that you have the confidence of everybody being on the same page.
Yeah, and if what I heard you say is like the goal 6 housing, we may not come up with a solution yet, but the goal is to bring it up and to move toward the community conversation. And maybe it's gonna be 5-6 years away, but at least it's a goal to get it moving.
Yeah, it's not saying we're gonna fix all this stuff in a year, this is what we're gonna work on in the next 2 years.
Mixed-use development in the corridors.
Don't.
There you go.
Well, and I think too, for the future, this is beyond my time, but I think one of the conversations you may have next year is when you talk about strategic planning, my experience with it is that you talk in terms of the short term, 1 to 2 years, and then you talk about medium term, 3 to 5 years. And so some of these things, quite honestly, could fall, beyond the short term, clearly. So housing is probably one of the easier examples. Even homelessness is another one. But I think to your point is it's okay for us to identify a very complex and tough issue and just be patient with it and make measurable progress and then reassess where we're at. I think quite honestly, the homeless action plan by the Tri-Cities is an example. Okay, we have a plan. We have, quite honestly, by the way, did the county commissioners approve it?
I need to check.
Oh, okay. So
It was on today. They were scheduled to approve it today.
yeah, so getting a coordinator on board and starting the navigation, there's little pieces we can start to work towards on the homeless issue. And not gonna solve it, but we're certainly gonna be taking the steps where we can be much more effective. So I think, quite honestly, I think this is one of the reasons why this community has so much confidence in this organization and this council, is that we've been able to communicate these things. So the fact that we're taking the time for a vision, for a comprehensive plan, we act on these things and we communicate that outward. I think 3A is a result of that. The community is saying, we have confidence that you're gonna execute this. Largely based on, the progress we've made here. Now, they're taking a big leap of faith here, and so we must execute on that promise. But to me, all this conversation we're having and the fact we're trying to be strategic here with our goals and be measurable, I think speaks to the power of this organization and the confidence it instills into our community. Okay, well, I appreciate that conversation, and a lot of what council's identified on the existing goals lines up really well with what staff's been thinking. So I think you're gonna find that we're looking for direction and conversation there. Okay, the next slide, and I think we'll try to maybe wrap this up a bit here. We're just trying to reinforce here what I was describing earlier here, where we have this process, we start this weekend, we'll have follow-up study sessions to flesh out details. Eventually we come back, council approves everything, and we leap into a budget process. And then we come back to council and we just reaffirm where the goals are and into the budget. This tends to be in September, you adopt, and then we get to start over again. So, an ongoing process. So one of the important issues that I think we're gonna be talking about here at the retreat is, and somebody said it here, and I certainly did, was the lodging tax. I think it was Councilmember Grove talked about it. We've been talking about this for a while, so that's one of the pieces we'd love for you to talk about and some direction. And so one of the things here that we wanna reaffirm here with the council is just the timeline for an election. So you don't have a lot of time in essence. So you wanna put something on the ballot here in November, it in essence requires you to make some decisions as early as March. So.
Let's do it.
Plugging the election.
Yep.
And yeah, there's a whole host of things we could talk about, even certainly beyond the lodging tax. We have charter amendments, we got a whole host of those kind of things.
Referendum changes.
Yeah, we got all sorts of things to talk through.
Whether or not to advance a district in downtown.
Oh, a downtown. By the way, yeah, Councilmember Driscoll's not here, but we had a DDA steering committee meeting here today, and very promising.
Oh, yes.
Very, very promising. We'll talk more about that at the retreat. Yes. Any other thoughts about our election timeline? Okay. So, Sam, explain this one. This is one of my favorite ones.
This may be redundant now, but we work with a partner called ResourceX for our priority-based budgeting program, and they work with over 250 other organizations to incorporate their community's goals into their program evaluation. So when I heard we wanted to know a little bit more about what other communities are prioritizing, I reached out to them, and they came up with these 10 themes you see in the circles. So in all of their 250 communities that they work with throughout North America, these are the 10 themes they see repeatedly. And so we sort of spaghetti mapped what they're seeing to where our current work plan lies. There's a lot of coverage here.
I tried to follow some of those lines.
So did I.
I know.
It just didn't work for me.
So we're gonna translate that into a Gantt chart here.
There you go, there you go.
I don't think it works that way.
Neither does that one.
This is a different kind of visual.
But just to give you a feel, right, overall, cities have pretty similar goals. Now, how you want to tackle those can vary, what the priority is in your community can vary, but pretty similar slate of goals across the country.
And next, that's it.
See you on Friday.
So 8:30, both days?
Yeah, I think you have an agenda.
8:30.
By the way, did David Marvin send out a more formal agenda or not? Oh, okay, so what you see in the book is it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah,
All right. Yeah, and David's gonna be there facilitating the meeting, doing some other things. And then, Lucy sent out the email, do everyone get an email about dinner on Friday night?
Yes.
Okay.
Already emailed her.
I got it. And as if this wasn't enough reading material, we also gave council a book to read.
You did?
And yes, you should have that.
You're going to, cause I don't have it.
Uh-oh.
It should be in your binder. It's actually in the back of
Oh,
your binder.
it's hidden in this thing.
Yeah.
You know, this book has been around a while, and so maybe some of you have already read this, but, you know, I think it's okay. David is gonna be using a little bit of this. If you have time, I would, it's actually a great read. It's not all that complicated. But I think as a council member, as part of the leadership team, I think there's some great observations in this book that I think could be helpful. Nothing earth-shattering. Well, maybe it is. We'll find out.
I was bringing you all candy, but, candy.
Yeah, you
Thank you so much.
Ken, what?
Bring candy.
That's what I was gonna do.
Anything else, or?
I just wanted, just quickly here, I sat in on another one of the Tri-County Health Department's updates here for elected officials, and I don't know if anybody else from the city was there. And it was by far the most promising message I've heard since this whole thing began. So the Omnicon is dropping off a cliff. So all of the measures in the last couple of weeks, I mean, are dropping eightfold, fourfold. And the only one that's kind of stuck a little bit is the percent of ICU units that are available here in the kind of the South Metro. It's about 13% available. And part of the explanation for that is that what they're seeing is now that there are other surgeries that are coming in that were delayed and kind of occupying some of the ICU units. So it's not just all COVID that's occupying ICU is kind of the point. They also talked a little bit about the other variants that are seeing now, but the short version of what I took away from that is that they're both even less severe and mild than the Omicron. And some of them are international, and so I think there is really some good news, and I dare to say, are we entering the endemic?
I hope so.
So I think we are really close to somebody saying that at a national level, my belief. So anyways, great news, just wanted to pass it along.
Great.
Yay.
Yeah.
City Attorney, do you have any updates?
No updates.
What'd you say Trump would say?
That's because the current leader doesn't know where he is.
Council, I just got a card to send to Mayor Stolzman and Mayors of Louisville and Superior. So if you guys, I'll pass this around, you guys, staff got a little gift basket to
Oh, nice.
give them some stuff. For the fire, the Marshall Fire.
Did the gift basket have snow plows in it?
All right, it's 9:34 and
That's sad.
we're adjourned.
Do you want us to sign that?
Yeah.